Hello, everyone. I'm Alberto with Owl Central Games. I am the events and marketing manager here in our game center and for our online TCG retail brand. And I also happen to be a Flesh and Blood aficionado. I'm not a particularly good player, which is why I've invited our guests, Ciro Gambone and Rylie Groff, joining us for our Uprising Limited set review. I've asked them to join us selfishly because I want to get better at Limited, and spending time with these two gentlemen will certainly make you better at the game. So before we get started, just a brief primer on Owl Central Games. If this is your first time hearing about us, like I said, we are an online retailer for all things TCG, including Flesh and Blood, and we are always buying and selling singles. We're in the process of launching a national buy list service for Flesh and Blood singles so that we can shore up our inventory and offer up all the most relevant and competitive singles for your tournament seasons as we journey through this game together. So yeah, we'll put an email and my Twitter handle in the video description, and you can just reach out to me, and I'd be happy to talk to you about buying your collections and otherwise telling you more about our brand. We're based in central Pennsylvania, and I have the pleasure of having these two gentlemen be a couple of our local players, but not exactly local in name. Both of them are Pro Tour competitors, and they're a couple of the best players that we have in our community, and it's an absolute privilege to have them. So before I pass it off to them to introduce themselves, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of how this set review is going to work. What we're going to be doing is going through all the standout cards in each class and the generic cards as well for specifically the draft format. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of overlap between draft and sealed, but as you're getting ready for the Road to Nat season, as well as just drafting your local armories, these are the cards that are going to have the greatest impact on your gameplay decisions, on your pick orders and draft, that you're going to see the most and are going to have, again, the largest impact on the quality of your games, game in, game out. So we're going to go through all of the standout generics. Rylie has put together a list and outline with the help of Ciro here of all of the cards that we really need to keep our eye on and understand and evaluate so that we can really up our games for the draft season. So we'll go through the generics first, then we're going to walk through all of the Draconic cards. We'll break down Draconic Illusionist, then Draconic Ninja, and then we'll round things out with all of the Ice and Iyslander specific cards. Once we're done with that portion of the evaluation and the set review, we will go through a couple of crack-a-packs so that we can put some of this evaluation to the test in real time. So before I keep yammering, thank you so much, Rylie and Ciro, for coming on. And if you could just take a moment to introduce yourselves briefly, and if you could, tell me about your first, your pre-release weekend. We all finally got our hands on some packs, cracked some packs, played some games. So Ciro, how was your pre-release?
Mine wasn't as exciting as it could have been. I was actually in Colorado for the whole thing on vacation, so I was, hiking, whitewater rafting, other non-fab type things. But I did manage to hit one pre-release while I was there. And
so you pre-released during your vacation in Colorado.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I went 3-2 on 5. It was an alright pool. Both the losses were the mirror, and we'll get into it later, but the mirror is something special.
Let's unpack that a little later, shall we?
Absolutely. So I'm Rylie Groff. I guess I'm kind of well known around here in this area. I kind of tried to do my best to get Flesh and Blood to become a more prominent and played game here in South Central Pennsylvania. I helped to create a Facebook group to really just bring attention to the community and give people a place to gather, bring attention, like I said, to the game, get the game into the stores. So we're up to like 170 people now on that page. We're pushing 200 now. We have 6 local stores, with Owl Central being one of the stores here that we also have Flesh and Blood. We play Armories. Got to play one of the pre-releases here this weekend as well. But I was incredibly fortunate that I got to play 3 pre-releases this weekend at 3 of our local stores, and that was just a really awesome experience. So I got to play 3 sealeds, and we even did 1 draft here with our prize packs, which is awesome.
Super fun.
I am just riding high on Iyslander right now. Like, Iyslander's my life now, I think. I played 12 games of Iyslander and went 12-0, whatever that means. And I played some Dromai too, and not a fan. That's not going to be going back to that one anytime soon.
Maybe not in sealed.
Maybe not at all, but definitely not in sealed. Not for me. But I had a really great weekend. I got to open like 60 packs across the weekend. It was just amazing. Pull some legendaries, some really cool full art dragons.
Yeah, the Marvels you opened were awesome.
Yeah, really. It
Great.
was like the best weekend I've had in a long time.
So I think during the Owl pre-release on Saturday, we in one case opened 3 legendaries for the sealed event, which is pretty awesome. But speaking of the draft that we did after our pre-release, Rylie and I both drafted Iyslander. Another motivation for having Rylie come on and teach us all about the limited format is that we had very different experiences in the draft, where I went 0-3 with Iyslander and Rylie went 3-0. So not only 12-0 in sealed with Iyslander, but then 3-0 in the draft that we played after the pre-release. So we're gonna have a lot of burning questions about how to play Iyslander and how to play against Iyslander, because
Are you sure they're not freezing?
They're freezing.
Berto?
all right, off to the puns.
Yeah.
So, without further ado, why don't we just go ahead? We got a good amount of cards to get through, and
do
while you did a really great job of trimming the fat, trimming it down, so that we could have like a relatively bite-sized piece of content here for everybody, it is going to take a bit to get through all of the standout cards. So, why don't we jump into the standout generics first? Alright guys, the first card that you have on our list here is Critical Strike at blue specifically. Alright, so Critical Strike is 1 resource cost, it attacks for 3 and it blocks for 3. The text box is just flavor text, so that's it. It's as vanilla as it gets, a 1 for 3, blocks for 3. So why specifically Critical Strike at blue?
So another thing to note about this card is you can also ignore its attack value. The only thing that matters on this card is that it pitches for 3 resources and it blocks for 3.
Okay.
There are very, very few options at generic for those exact specifications. In fact, there's literally only one other card.
Right.
And it's the next card that we're going to talk about, which is Blue Sift.
Okay. Any other thoughts you want to add to Critical Strike before we just jump right into the next card?
We were joking that it's like a titanium
It is a
bauble, and that's like
It's literally what
probably
it is.
good enough when you're trying to stay open early in draft.
Okay. Yeah, because that was one of the first things that really piqued my interest, that you even put this on the list, and it makes sense that it's literally just for its block value, because it was really hard making block decisions when I was playing this weekend, and having cards that are literally just for blocking in your deck when the format is as fast as it is makes a lot of sense to me, and I definitely appreciate that. So on to the next card is just Sift blue and basically Titanium Bauble again.
It's more playable than Critical Strike, but pretty much, yeah.
Cool. Well, let me go ahead and read it so that people have some context. Sift is 0 cost at blue here. Put up to 2 cards from your hand on the bottom of your deck, then draw that many cards, go again. And it is a generic action, so...
So I think the key here is in Iyslander, it becomes significantly better than Blue Critical Strike because you can play from Arsenal at instant speed and it turns on Waning Moon, which Critical Strike isn't going to do for you. But outside of that, Titanium Bubble.
I mean, are there any meaningful use cases as far as your ability to filter those 2 cards?
It has value.
Yeah, it has some niche playability. I think for the most part, whenever you're building your sealed deck or your draft deck, there is a critical mass of blues that you're going to need. And you're going to want a higher critical mass if you have to play against Iyslander. So having just access to more blues is really important. If you ever have it in a hand where you don't need all the blues, for example, it's not a terrible card to Arsenal because you can play it for free and maybe you can fix a hand a little bit if necessary. And then it also has more playability in Iyslander for turning on the Waning Moon.
For an example, in the blue count issue, in my sealed pool last weekend, I had 9 playable blues, and some of them are pretty bad. You don't always have this breadth of card base, especially in sealed, and these are the premier junk blues because they block 3 instead of 2.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And what I'm already starting to hear is that a lot of the card evaluation is really being warped by Iyslander's presence as a hero in general. Just Iyslander puts pressure on both of these other Draconic decks to increase their blue count to play through the disruption that she provides. And then also she's fighting for these, maybe not fighting for these junk blues, but when you're looking for filler in the draft, these need to be rated a little higher than you would expect because of their block value and because the critical mass of blues that you need to be competitive is more than you'd think, I guess, right?
And I think we'll touch on this a little bit more later. But despite the thematics of this set and some of the mechanics being very red pitch focused, all of these decks need blues to function. You wouldn't necessarily get that just by reading whatever text is on the heroes. But yeah, if you're playing a deck with 0 blues, you're going to have a really bad time. So if you can get the premier blues and you can get them early, pack 1, pick 1 or 2, if 3, 4, if they're still coming around, I think you're going to be really happy with those.
Another key bit there is that these cards keep you open, right? Which is something we didn't touch on yet. So, I mean, in draft, the concept of keeping open is pretty relevant in all Fab sets and all TCGs that I'm aware of. And these are some of the ways that you can do that. We'll touch on some more ways later when we get to the rest of the generics. But.
Yeah, and I mean, since we are just hanging out in the generic section for now, before we dive too much further into the specific cards that we're looking for, as far as the draft strategy is concerned, how long can we reasonably stay open, and how incentivized are we to try and stay open when finding our draft seed? Like, is this like a, pick your lane, force your lane early kind of format? And what of these generics are really trying to keep you open, or are they just like, well, I'll pick them up if I see them, but I'm going for the class-specific cards first?
This set's very interesting because most packs you're not going to see more than 3 generics. So by the time you're getting to pick 4 or pick 5, you are likely going to have packs of no generics at that point, assuming everyone's going to stay open for the first 3 picks. So you can hedge a little bit as far as more powerful cards or some of the standouts in the classes, like we said, but I think in this set, you're going to have to really be paying attention as far as what's being picked by the time you're getting to pack 5 and 6. I think if you haven't committed by pack 7, you're really going to be hurting. We talked a little bit before recording that you don't have quite the same problem as you did in Tales of Aria, where Oldhim existed in that format and was constantly threatening of decking you out. Mm-hmm. So you wanted to have even more than 30 playables. You can definitely, I think, get away with 30 playables in this set. But I think you want to have more options if possible. You certainly don't want to limit yourself or trap yourself into having to put a cracked bauble in your deck.
Yeah. The caveat there with the 30 playables is that there are some really good sideboard options that you're only going to play in certain matchups. And if you pull some of those and you consider those, then your playable count needs to be more than 30 because you don't want to play in every matchup. I'd also say regarding the pick number piece of it, pick 9 is the wheel, and pick 9 is when you see, if you remembered what you saw when you opened your pack, you can make some educated guesses about what everyone else is on. And I think if you don't know what your lane is by pick 9, you might be having a bad time by the end of the draft.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're making a firm decision, pick 9, but you've spread yourself a little too thin over those first 8 picks, it's going to be tough to make sure that you're shoring up your sideboard strategy, improving your matchup against maybe the problem hero that you're going to be facing while having a very clean game plan in your 30-card deck.
And that's where staying open counts in those first 8 picks, and it's also where you can do a little bit of hedge drafting, right? Like, if, say, you pick 1, 2, and 3, you get a bomb for Iyslander, Dromai, that's okay. You're taking them from somebody else. You're staying open.
Sure. So this next group of cards, they all have similar roles, similar functions. So we're just going to read each of them first before we go ahead and talk about them. But there are generic poppers. So let's take a look at Fyendal's Fighting Spirit first. That is a 3-cost at red. When you attack or defend with Fyendal's Fighting Spirit, if you have less life than opposing hero, gain 1 life. It attacks for 7, it blocks for 2. The yellow, of course, attacks for 6. The blue attacks for 5, and obviously the blue not to be looked out for. Next, Brothers in Arms. Let's read the red of the cycle here. That is 2 resource cost, attacks for 6 and defends for 2. And when you defend with Brother in Arms, you may pay 1 resource. If you do, it gains +2 defense. And then lastly, we are taking a look at Flex, which is at red is 0 cost. And when you attack or defend with Flex, you may pay 2 resources. If you do, it gains +2. It has a base attack of 4. So once again, another popper. And it blocks for 2.
So when we're saying popper, what we're referring to is these are cards with 6 or greater attack that when defending an attack with Phantasm will destroy them and end the combat chain. So that's why it's important for Fyndal's Fighting Spirit, both red and yellow, meet that condition of having 7 and 6 attack respectively. Brothers in Arms, red is only at 6, and Flex has the additional capability of going from 4 to 6 when it's defending to also trigger Phantasm. I think these cards have some niche usages, maybe outside of Fyndal's Fighting Spirit. I mean, if you had to play it, it's probably not the worst card in the world to play for 7 attack at red. But Brothers in Arms is a really good card for actually defending, because it's one of the few ways to be able to block for 4 just with 1 card by paying the additional resource to get it from 2 to 4 defense. And there's a lot of other ways to utilize those excess resources between Quell and Arcane Barrier, maybe paying for Waning Moon or doing something instant speed with Iyslander. And as far as Flex goes, I don't think playing a 0 for 4 at the end of a long chain in Phi or Dromai is the worst thing in the world.
And it's also a resource dump. I mean, 0, pitching a card to it sending 6 isn't the end of the world either.
Agreed.
I think anyone who's played Tales Limited knows 3 for 7 is pretty good. So sending red Fyndals isn't the end of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a decent threat that has a potential to be basically an attack for 8, right? Because it's like an 8 life total swing.
Sure.
So, I mean, all these cards have enough flexibility and
Flexibility.
all right,
Flex.
easy, Rylie, easy. I make dad jokes by accident now. It's not
Do you
my
think
fault.
they called it Flex because it has flexibility? Because it can be 4 or 6?
Of course.
James White, he did it again.
He's a genius. he's God of our time. So, yeah, the inherent flexibility of these cards at generic and the fact that they do pop those Phantasm attacks just makes them inherently super useful, valuable, and why they are in the standout generic section here. So let's go ahead to our next little grouping of cards. Well, actually, we have one more standout card that I want to go over here. We are looking at Scar for a Scar, particularly red. So let's go ahead and read Scar for a Scar, but you'll recognize it from Welcome to Wraith. It's a 0 cost, it attacks for 4, it defends for 2, and it says when you play Scar for a Scar, if you have less life than your opponent, it gains Go Again. 0 for 4, conditional Go Again, but Go Again nonetheless.
Additional point to make is it's turned on automatically if you're playing as Iyslander, because you start at 18 life instead of 20. So you are automatically at a health deficit, so it'll always have Go Again going first at the very least. And there's like I was mentioning earlier, thematically red matters, and especially Go Again matters in this set. So if you're able to take a little bit of damage to strategically get yourself to maybe 1-2 life below your opponent, and then respond with that Scar for a Scar to start your combat chain, you're going to be rewarded a lot of the time.
Particularly in Phi, because you're looking for a way to play your first attack action card with Go Again, which isn't always the easiest thing, because a lot of them are looking to be the second or later chain link on the combat chain, and Scar for Scar can be that first attack for you without even pitching a card, if you line up your health right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great starter for Phi. It's a great card to get things going for Dromai, and at the end of the day, for Iyslander, like, in my experience over the weekend, being able to lead off with a Scar for a Scar on your turn and it costing no resources just like made everything else that I was doing with Iyslander feel so much more powerful. So the card just slots so like perfectly into every single deck, and it makes sense that it's here in the standout section.
I also want to say, as far as Scar for Scar, red in particular is concerned, if you manage to assemble a board state with Dromai, and that's the only card you keep in your hand, playing that by itself is going to turn on all your chain of army of dragons, to come attacking afterwards. So red in particular for Dromai, but like we said, red is definitely the premium Scar for Scar. But I think they're all pretty good, especially if you're trying to stay open early in a draft.
Yeah.
Great. On to the next generic standout card. We're looking at strategic planning, specifically in blue. Okay, so strategic planning is a 1 resource cost, and it is a generic action that blocks for 2, and it reads, put an action card with cost 0 from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's deck. At the beginning of the end phase, draw a card. Note, it does say a graveyard, does not have to be your own graveyard, and typically probably won't be.
This card is the truth. I am so high on this card. It does, especially if you're playing Iyslander. Now remember, I'm a little bit biased to Iyslander right now. But if you get this card, whether you're an Iyslander or not, and you resolve it playing against Phi, and you get to bottom their Phoenix Flame. So it's going to significantly reduce probably their ability to get to Rupture or 4 Draconic Chain Links and just reduce the amount of damage that you're going to be taking. But the thing I really like about it in Iyslander is if you can play it from Arsenal, it's going to turn on... if you play it on from Arsenal, really, it doesn't even have to be from Arsenal, but it gives you the option to play it from Arsenal. And it replaces itself, because at the end phase, you get to draw a card. And that's going to also happen on your opponent's end phase if you played it on their turn. Because it's an action, it's not an aura like the ripples that we're going to talk about later. And it has that niche benefit to really mess with Fi in particular.
Now that card is one I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. There's a couple things that make it not great, right? One is we're defining a very specific scenario that only happens in one matchup, and it's not that great when you're not Iyslander. And to top that all off, Fi's hero power is an instant, so he can counter it with some effectiveness.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty high on the card as well for the very specific use case that Rylie has identified here. Being able to turn one strategic planning away their first Phoenix Flame to the bottom of their graveyard felt really awesome. The amount of just time that buys you against Fi is such a high ceiling. And it's just a great pitch card, obviously, at blue, so it's flexible there. But yes, I guess it's relatively narrow, and the fact of the matter is, I don't really see the use cases being particularly meaningful in the other decks. So, I would see this more as, a sideboard generic, but, you're gonna run into a lot of Fi, and if you're playing Iyslander, you definitely want 1 to 2 copies of this card, I would say. Just because it pitches super well, and the ceiling is insanely high compared to what it looks like on its face. Good? On to the next one?
Moving on.
All right. The next couple we're going to go over have very similar outcomes, similar effects. So let me read them each. We're going to start with Healing Balm, which you wouldn't expect to see in this list. And I'm sure Ciro has something to say about that. But Healing Balm reads 0 cost. It is a generic action. It blocks for 2. And the text simply says gain 3 life. And the other card, and I think we're saving the best for last, because if, I'm being honest, this is probably the best generic card in the set, as far as I'm concerned. Oasis Respite, right? Oasis Respite at red. It's a 1 cost, generic instant, and the red in the cycle says prevent the next 4 damage that would be dealt to target hero this turn by a source of your choice. If they have less life than each other hero, they may gain 1 life. At yellow, it prevents 3 damage. At blue, it prevents 2. Talk to me about these cards.
Well, let's do Healing Balm first. I don't know. A Healing Balm, there's a lot of volatility with the card. I will agree with that, but it's a huge payoff if you can get it on turn 1. Really strong. I don't think it's that bad if you can just throw it down at the end of the chain, because to me that's like a preventative stop 3 damage in a way. So it's 3 damage that you don't have to block on the next turn because you gain that gap in life total. Now you might want to end up blocking something, so again in that case, it's a little bit worse if there's a hit effect from fire or whatever. But additionally, with Iyslander, this is a non-attack action that's going to turn on your Waning Moon as well. So we put the red on here specifically because that's really good going first with all of the heroes. And then there's some niche additional benefit if you play it in Iyslander, because you can play it out of the arsenal to gain a life and turn on the Waning Moon.
Sure. I mean, and it looks similarly, it looks in its effect similar to what's the sigil that costs 1.
Except it consumes an action, right? Which makes it significantly worse. So, like Rylie said, turn 1, the red one's nice. Particularly in Dromai, since you're giving everything go again a lot of the time, ending a chain with the red one can be nice. And then the life gain, particularly in the Iyslander matchup, since you're not going to be able, there's a lot of uninteractable damage in that matchup, you can find a lot of value in that 3 healing. I still don't think it's very good. I think the best use case for the card is the blue one in Iyslander. Just flipping it, heal 1, turn on Waning Moon. That's probably the ceiling on the card, but it's okay.
Oasis Respite?
It's the best card ever.
I mean, this card
best card in the whole world.
Not only the best generic, it's probably the best common in the set as well.
Yeah.
It's definitely, as far as common, I mean, there is a better generic. If you manage to get...
Okay, yeah.
I mean, we're going to touch on some Majestics a little bit, but for the most part, we're focusing on commons and rares.
Sure.
But this card does everything. It's instant speed. It prevents damage, and it potentially heals you as well. So this is up to a 5 life point swing if you can time it correctly. And there's just being able to do stuff at instant speed in a format where there are frostbites and other instant speed actions is really good. So like skillful use of this can play around a lot of stuff that arcane damage type of stuff that Iyslander wants to do. Frostbite interactions, breaking things, a lot of niche cool things you can do on turn 1 with an Oasis Respite, especially if you're playing against an Iyslander. So I will say you might not always want this in every matchup, but you really, really want them if you're playing against Iyslander.
It's also just about the only way to wall out Rapid Reflex in the whole set, because there's one DR, 2 DRs if you're Iyslander.
Right.
I mean,
or 3 pieces of Quell, but that feels pretty
And also
bad.
the synergy with Quell or Arcane Barrier is fantastic, right? If you pitch a blue to play Quell, pitch a blue to play Oasis Respite, you're floating 2 resources. You can Quell 2 things or AB 2 things. You're talking about a 7 life swing off 2 cards.
Right. The only thing I can knock Oasis Respite for is it doesn't turn on Waning Moon. Because it's an instant. So.
Yeah, I mean that's like the one drawback in the fact that like you actually want this red over the blue for the blue's flexibility and being able to pitch, being able to play from Icelander's arsenal, because it is an instant. So that's the one sad thing, but all in all, it just does everything you need.
It's a very strong and flexible card.
Love it. Love this card. Best card ever. The games that I won were because I got to play that card in numbers, and the draft that I tanked, I didn't get to pick up a single copy, and it makes all the difference, especially playing against this guy in the Iyslander mirror in round 1. Could not manage the mirror without, like, the fact that you had 1 or 2 in your deck versus me having 0 just dictated the capacity that I had to compete in that matchup.
Yeah, and in a way, a critical mass of Oasis Respite, the more you have, to an extent, the better they get. Because if you can pitch a blue and play 2 Oasis Respites, for example, I mean, you're just going to wall up and gain a lot. I did that. I played 2 reds, gained 2 life, and completely stymied my entire opponent's turn. So that was really powerful.
So best card, best common, best generic, how many would you play in your deck?
In which matchup?
Oh, okay. How many would you be comfortable drafting?
3 if they were all red. Yeah. And also, it can enable like a pretty extreme pivot turn, especially in Iyslander, right? Because you can crack your chest to Oasis Respite for only one card, and now you're holding 3 to 4 cards. You don't want to do that early because you're throwing away your Arcane Barrier, but doing that late could win you the game.
Yeah, and the draft that we played, I ended up with 2 reds, and I probably would have took a third one. I didn't play 2 in every matchup. I mostly played 1, but when we played Iyslander, I played 2, because it's really hard to stop 4 or 5 Arcane in this format. It's almost impossible without Oasis Respite.
Yeah, every time I was staring down that like red Ice Dart, whatever the 5 Arcane, every time you played that against me, I was like, and not having a Respite in hand was like, there's no way.
What other option
There's
do you have?
no way to preserve my life totally.
The only other option I can think of off the top of my head is dumping multiple cards into Helios Miter.
Right.
So maybe you got a Sigil of Protection out, but you still have the Arcane Barrier on top of that to stop 5. So, yeah, almost no alternatives.
Yeah, so any final thoughts on the best common generic in the set?
It's great. Draft it.
I probably the only thing I want to say is that's not a comprehensive list. There are other generics, but to save the viewers' time and ours as well, I would just try to
we got places
identify
to be, people.
the most important ones and the ones you should really be looking out for, especially early into your pack 1 pick ones, pack 2 pick ones, things like that.
Yeah, and to reiterate, the cards that we're going to go through, these are the cards that are going to have the largest impact on your decision making in the draft portion, as well as just your decision making in game. They are going to have the largest impact on gameplay decisions and on the outcomes of games at common, at rare. And so understanding the impact of these cards, being able to evaluate them, are going to make a really huge difference in your ability to deck build and play and figure out your matchups. But we're going to have to get a little more into the weeds now as we get into the actual class-specific or talented cards. So let's go ahead and move on to the group of cards that we've selected that are standout cards for Draconic in general. So a reminder that The Draconic talent applies to 2 classes, Phi, the Draconic Ninja, and Dromai, the Draconic Illusionist. So the cards that we're going to go through now are the standout specific commons and rares that can be played in either of these classes, in either of these decks, and are the cards that you're going to want to be looking out for in your first few picks of your draft, and are going to have a big impact on dictating what class you end up in and how you build your decks. So let's go ahead and jump in to our first Draconic card. Pulling it up here.
Before you start reading, I'm just going to note that anything that's Draconic by itself only comes in red. So there are no cycles as far as they are strictly red. So when you read like Blaze Headlong, it only comes in red. There's no other color.
So Blaze Headlong blue.
This is the card that doesn't exist yet.
Got you. Just keeping you on your toes, folks. Okay, so the first card we're looking at is Blaze Headlong. The cost is 0. It attacks for 4. It blocks for 2. And if you've played another red card this turn, Blaze Headlong has Go Again. So conditional Go Again, not particularly difficult to turn on, but conditional. Talk to me about this card.
This is a 0 for 4 with a massive upside. And an upside that's not, like you were saying, that's not a hard condition to meet. In fact, you're going to, most turns, you're just playing your turns the way you want to, or are as intended is going to activate this card. But even if you can't, still, as like with Scar for Scar, 0 for 4 is still pretty good.
Yep, this is also a great Arsenal card. If you can't make your line work, stick it in Arsenal, make it work next turn, you'll be on 5 cards. Another thing to say about this is probably that a lot of the Draconic cards, especially a common and rare, seem to be significantly more valuable in Phi than Dromai, and this is probably one of the exceptions. I think Dromai has no trouble getting maximum value out of this card.
Can you tell me why?
Dromai's in the business of playing reds, right?
Right.
Some of them are just non-attack actions with Go Again. Some of them are attack actions with Go Again. Her common and rare pool has a lot of Go Again reds that you would want to start your turn with, and then playing this after that, either before or after swinging out your allies, probably before so you don't get hit with a popper, is, it's 4 damage off 1 card.
Yeah.
That's all you can ask for.
So starting off with a red non-attack, all your dragons are going to have Go Again now, and then you lead with a 0 for 4 before they can even begin interacting with your chain.
Right.
That sounds really great.
It does.
I like that. That sounds good.
It's a good card.
All right, on to the next card we have written down here. It's going to be Breaking Point. That's a 1 resource, and it attacks for 5 and blocks for 3. And this is our first Rupture card. So I'm going to read this card, and then we're going to go over exactly what Rupture means, just to make sure we're on the same page. But again, Breaking Point, 1 resource, 5 attack, 3 defense, Rupture. If Breaking Point is played as Chainlink 4 or higher, it has, when this hits a hero, destroy all cards in their arsenal. So we're looking at a little mini Command and Conquer here.
Probably the most important things about this card is that it's 5 attack, blocks 3, and it only costs 1 resource. So a 1 for 5 that blocks 3 is not bad, but again, this is one that has a very significant upside if you can turn it on. I would say probably more in the mirror or more against Dromai, because a lot of time with Iyslander, they probably arsenal something they could play out an instant speed to kind of counter the effect of this being ruptured. But I think in the mirror and against Dromai, this becomes really, really powerful. And if it is irrelevant, again, it's a 1 for 5.
That blocks 3.
That blocks for 3.
And like we said before, that's red critical strike, right? Mm-hmm. So it's red critical strike with very relevant text. Obviously, that becomes a pretty good card.
Right, and it's Draconic.
That too. Yes.
You're probably not going to be able to give this Go Again very easily, but if you can, it might matter as far as building up your chain links.
Even if you can't, this being your 3rd Draconic chain link without Go Again still allows you to 5 power for free and then arsenal the Phoenix you pull, which is a pretty powerful line.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, that seems like a great way to wrap up a turn. It seems super powerful. Okay, and so actually, you know what? I do have a question here before we go on to the next card. Because looking at Rupture, this obviously is a payoff for going super wide in Draconic in general. And so when you're looking to draft either Phi or Dromai, probably specifically Phi, which is looking to go super wide with their attacks, not necessarily the dragons, are you valuing the payoffs, the Rupture cards, higher than the conditional Go Again cards early, or are you just like looking for the all the unconditional Go Again cards first before you try to pick up your payoff cards?
Well, I think we're going to touch on that in more detail later, but I think you need to fill out your unconditional Go Again before you can worry about Rupture. Because with the exception of some of the Rupture cards, like this one is okay to play without getting the Rupture trigger, but some of them are not as good if they don't get that Rupture text turned on. But for the most part, I think in order to do at least the 5 strategy, the unconditional go again is very, very important.
I think these Rupture cards will make a good deck better, but lacking the proper unconditional go again count will make any deck trash. So,
Right.
in that respect,
I completely agree.
Yeah, so if you're taking these too early and you're excited about the payoffs and you're excited about the ceiling and these big effects, but then someone else is drafting Fi and they're drafting it in a more disciplined manner, grabbing the stuff that actually makes the game plan tick, then you're going to be stuck with a lot of payoffs and not a lot of ways to turn them on, and your deck's just going to be a lot worse for it, right?
Right.
That's what I'm hearing. Cool. All right, so on to the next card here. We are looking at Lava Burst. Lava Burst is a 0 cost. It attacks for 2 and it blocks for 3. There's that 3 block value again. And it also has Rupture. So if Lava Burst is played as Chainlink 4 or higher, it has +3 attack.
This is actually a really good example of a card that I was just talking about, where you really want to play this one when it says Rupture. Playing a 0 for 2 is not very good. Playing a 0 for 5 is insane.
yeah.
But, yeah.
Having 3 block raises the floor quite a bit, and costing 0 means that you don't need to be floating any resources to fire this as your 4th chain link. Both of those things make it probably the most playable Rupture card, in my opinion. And yeah, like Rylie said, 0 for 5 is just way above rate, so it's fantastic.
It's just a lot easier to set up, right? So moving on to our next card is going to be Rise Up. It is a 1 cost, and it is a Dromai or Fi specialization. You can run it in either Dromai or Fi. And it is a 3 attack and 3 defense, and it also has Rupture. So another one of our payoffs here. And it says, if Rise Up is played as Chainlink 4 or higher, it has Dominate and +X attack, where X is twice the number of Phoenix Flames you control. That's a lot of text.
Yeah. So despite this saying Fi or Dromai specialization, I don't think you're ever probably playing in Dromai.
This is kind of what I was alluding to earlier.
Yeah, it blocks for 3, okay, but I mean the payoff exists almost exclusively in Fi. And if you can get it with at least 1 Phoenix Flame, you're pretty happy. If you get it with 2, you're elated. Because
Right.
now we're talking about a 1 for 7 with Dominate, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is the only card in the entire set that can get Dominate.
I believe that's true.
So that's like unique for that reason alone, but a 1 for 7 is above rate
Right.
over everything else that we've discussed so far.
So, like Rylie said, Phoenix Flames take a bit of a backseat in Dromai, but in Fi, I mean, this card, so let's say we have 1 Phoenix Flame, right? Because that's almost every turn you have. You have at least 1 Phoenix Flame on the chain. This turns into the 1/5/3 we talked about before, Critical Strike. With Dominate, though,
With Dominate.
which is nice for closing games. It's not that hard to set up 2 Phoenix Flame turns. You can do things like retrieve 1 on your opponent's turn with Fi's hero power. You could block with Retribution on your opponent's turn. You could, maybe a Flame Call Awakening. There's a lot of ways to set up 2 Phoenix turns. Also, like we talked about before, pulling a Phoenix Flame when you no longer have an action point, arsenaling it, and then playing it next turn in addition to your hero power is a 2 Phoenix Flame turn. And anytime you send the 7 Dominate in this format, like you're doing it. Like the game's probably over.
Yep.
And it's so punishing if your opponent is trying to hold back their defense to stop whatever your big Rupture payoff is,
Yeah.
and then it happens to be this dominated attack for 7.
I think the only demerit I can give this card is you probably have had to have played one of your other Phoenix Flames before trying to do this, because you likely would have had to get the second one in your graveyard in order to utilize both at some point, whether it's like using that cool tech of getting one and arsenaling it, so you still have the other one in the graveyard
Right.
to get it later. This is a card it's better played later, because the Dominate matters so much more later because it can help you seal the
Absolutely.
game.
I mean, we talked about it before. There's like the pseudo DR of Oasis Respite, and then there's a Majestic defense reaction and 1 Wizard defense reaction. There's not a lot to counteract Dominate in this format.
Sand
there's,
cover?
There's Quell. I mean,
Yeah,
there are things, but it's rare, and some of them are one-time use, like the Quell armor.
Yeah, I mean, even in the case that they're using all of their Quell armor to stop this attack from
You're still
killing
happy.
them, you're
Yeah.
still very happy with that outcome.
If they
right?
pay 12 resources into Helios Miter to not die, you've won the game anyway. So you're elated with that.
All right, on to the next one. We're looking at Flame Call Awakening. This is a 1 cost. It attacks for 3, it blocks for 2. And when you attack with Flame Call Awakening, if you've played another red card this turn, you may search your deck for a Phoenix Flame, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle.
This card's incredible.
Card's gas.
So, this card's incredible for maybe more reasons than you see it straight on its face. First of all, this is, I think, the only way a common or rare to retrieve a Phoenix Flame from your deck rather than your graveyard, which means not only have you retrieved it from your deck, you've gone back up a card, and you're now getting that second or third one in your graveyard. And on top of and it's enabling things like the Rise Up turns we were talking about before. But on top of all of that, playing it as your second or further chain link, this is also unconditional go again to play in your first chain link. Now you don't want to do that, you're sacrificing the Phoenix Flame tutor, but the fact that it's modal like that makes it even more powerful.
This is either an unconditional go again or a card neutral go again if you've already played your unconditional go again.
That's incredible.
That's very, very powerful. This is almost good enough if you had like 3 of these to consider playing Phoenix Flames and Dromai.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay.
Bold prediction. But if you have 3 of these, you're going to be pretty happy, I think.
Fair enough. I mean, I'm looking forward to the Phoenix Flame archetype for Dromai that comes out mid-format when people need to adapt their tech.
Honestly,
terrifying.
You'd rather have 3 Phoenix Flames than baubles, right? So if you only had 27 playables in Dromai, I'd rather they be Phoenix Flames.
I mean, in
than baubles.
Dromai, even if you just fetch the Phoenix Flame and use it as a resource, that's still a great line.
Even if you play it for 0, it turns on the rest of your dragons.
Right.
So, not a lot of synergy, but that alone is a synergy.
You could do worse for a card for an archetype that it's not designed for.
But it's better than that, is what you're about to read now.
Oh, this next card's good. Card's good. Made the list for a reason. We're looking at the Draconic Equipment chest piece, Sash of Sandakai. All right, I think critically acclaimed Sash. Very good. So it reads, at instant speed, you can destroy Sash of Sandakai, gain 1 resource. Activate this ability only if you've played a red card this turn. Not exactly hard to make happen.
No, not particularly. I mean, almost every single turn you're playing, this is going to be an option for you. Yeah. So this just, it takes what you want to do, it makes it even better without, like we had said, you don't have to jump through any hoops to do this, really. You're going to be playing the red cards anyway. So getting that 1 resource is the difference between you being able to play the Rupture card and having to arsenal the Rupture card.
The number of Phi lines that are off by 1 resource from being like 17 damage instead of 12 damage, it might sound like it doesn't happen that often, but it does. Having, pitching a blue and then having that 4th resource off the chest is what's going to enable your backbreaking turns.
And additionally, if Iyslander tries to disrupt you, maybe by giving you a Frostbite, you can respond, get that extra resource to pay for the Frostbite, and continue to play the turn that you wanted to play originally.
Also, critically, it's an instant, so it's not closing your chain as Phi, so you can do it later in the turn.
So that's going to wrap up our generic Draconic cards, and so now we're actually going to finally start diving directly into the specific classes. So the first we're going to talk about is Dromai, the Draconic Illusionist. So before we actually jump into specific cards for Dromai, let's take a moment to bring up Dromai's text. I'm sure you're all familiar at this point, but it doesn't hurt to go over it one more time. So let's read Dromai Ash Artist, our Draconic Illusionist. She has 4 intellect, 20 life, and she reads, whenever you pitch a red card, create an Ash token. If you've played a red card this turn, dragons you control have go again while attacking. So why don't you just walk us through what the Ash and Aether Ashwing mechanics are, and kind of what the strategy and the play patterns of Dromai typically look like, so that we have some context as we break down the Illusionist cards.
So Ash alone doesn't really do anything by itself. It's more of a resource that's used to pay for an additional cost to play your other cards. Generally what you're doing is you're using them to transform the Ash into one of the dragons, which becomes an ally for you that you can use to attack with, mostly, but the baby dragons, the Ash Wings, I think they're called Ash Wings, they also have Arcane Barrier. So this is a way to get yourself additional Arcane Barrier in the Iyslander matchup. When we discussed, there's next to no arcane barrier or prevention sources available to you in the set. So that's really important. There's a couple other things that interact with the ash, like sand cover is the one that I can think. I can't remember off the top of my head if there's any more, but I think those are the most important ones.
Yeah. Ash is also the introduction of a new keyword, material, which no one talks about because they just call it ash, but there might be more materials in the future. I don't know. Maybe ones that don't grant phantasm to your dragons, which could be sick.
Yes. I think that's something that we should also mention is, so anytime you transform an ash into one of your allies, it gives that phantasm keyword to your dragon or to your ash wings, which means anytime your opponent blocks it with a 6 attack or greater, those poppers we referred to earlier, will close your combat chain immediately, most likely ending your turn.
Yeah, that was your action point. Now, the only mitigation that I can think of that's in the set is the
silent stilettos, which are very expensive to
They cost 3.
Right. In a deck that wants to be playing reds.
Correct.
Cool. So Ash, Ether Ashwings, Dromai's ability. We've got some context here. Let's go ahead and dive into the cards that really make her tick in this limited format. These are the cards that you're going to want to look out for. These are the cards that are going to push you down the Dromai lane in your draft pod, and things that you should really be considering picking within your first few picks, especially if the standout generics start to dry up. You'll want to start making hedging picks towards certain classes based on their power level, and these are the cards that you want to look out for that are going to push you in that direction. So let's start here. Our first card is going to be one of our dragons. It is Asvolai. So let's read the actual card itself, Invoke Asvolai, which is a 0-cost invocation. So all of these dragons, they're invocation cards, right? So you actually have to play the invocation, which is a card in and of itself. That invocation transforms the material that is ash into the dragon, which is technically a separate piece of cardboard, but is the back side of your invocation card, right? So Invoke Asvolai is a Draconic Illusionist action invocation, and it is at rare. It costs 0, so you are going to notice that the dragons that are included in this list are the cheaper ones, right? The more affordable ones. So this one reads, transform target ash you control into Asvolai, go again. All these invocations do have go again, so note that you have an action point after you play them. But let's go ahead and read the dragon itself. This dragon is a base 2 attack and has 3 health. Whenever Asvolai attacks, you may have him deal 1 arcane damage to up to any 2 targets.
So I included this one because this is the Mirror Breaker dragon that you want to play. Because if your opponent is the first to amass a board state, and then you can respond by playing out Asvolai, you can very efficiently clear their board state. So you can maybe attack 1 Ashwing and then deal an arcane to 2 other Ashwings, effectively clearing 3 Ashwings. Another important note that I want to make before we talk about any of the other dragons is all the invocations come in red and have go again. So these are really important because if you play them, it triggers the Dromai ability to give the rest of your dragon allies go again for the rest of the turn. So that's kind of what's going to start your chain going. Another important thing to note is if it is perhaps an invocation that costs 1, you cannot play the invocation and pitch a red card to generate the ash and transform that ash. You need to have an ash in the arena to target when you play the card. Right. So I think that was a misconception that I noticed a lot of people had over the weekend. So it does significantly make the invocations a little bit worse on turn 1 if you have no other way to get an ash on board.
Turns out you can't play a card without a target.
Correct. Yeah. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? Yeah.
Hey, not everybody's used to these materials running around.
But Asvolai is the Mirror Breaker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One more note about Asvolai and 0-cost dragons in general is I think there's a little bit of premium there, where that card just became a 1-card hand, which no other cost value of dragon can. If you have an ash and you have a 0-cost invocation, that's your red for the turn. That's a dragon, and that's allowing you to swing out all the rest of your dragons with go again.
It's terrifying. Yeah. This is a good dragon.
It's a powerful dragon.
A very good boy. Okay. All right. So moving on, I'm going to actually skip a couple here and find our next dragon on the list. Let's go ahead and look at Kyloria. So the invocation is a 1-cost, and this blocks for 3, and it transforms target ash into Kyloria. That's the invocation, of course. Let's go ahead and read Kyloria's text here. Kyloria has a base power 4 and 2 life. And whenever Kyloria hits a hero, gain control of an item they control. If you don't gain control of an item this way, draw a card. So that's a 1-for-4 draw a card?
Yeah.
Is that what that is?
In this format, yeah, because there's no items that you're going to be taking control of. But it turns out drawing a card in all the formats is extremely powerful. So basically, every time you attack with this and it hits, you're going to get to draw a card. And that's extremely powerful. It might be a card that you're going to arsenal. It might be a card that you're going to play further down in your chain. Regardless, you're really happy to draw a card. And if your opponent has to block this because it's the 4 breakpoint, it becomes very challenging for them to block that without having to commit 2 cards to it.
It's a must kill and it's a 2-card block. I mean, it's incredible.
You know, it is easy to deal with, it seems, at 2 life, but the fact that your opponent absolutely has to deal with it or you will win the game.
I mean, if you block it with 2 cards, then pitch a card, send another card at it. You've just spent your whole hand to deal with Kyloria.
Yeah, this card looks like an absolute bomb. Like at 1 resource, like this to me reads as like the first real bomb out of the list of cards that we've gone through. So if you're seeing this in your first few picks, this is the kind of card that like will supersede all of those standout generics that we went over just on sheer power level. Like, this is a really great reason to be in Draconic Illusionist.
This is the type of dragon that incentivizes you to pick the poppers. Because that's one of the only ways to deal with this with 1 card.
Right.
With the exception of Iyslander, who might be able to do some things at instant speed to target with arcane damage. But we'll talk more about that specific concept when we get to the Iyslander cards.
Great. So there are a couple of other dragons on this list, so why don't we go ahead and knock out the dragons and we'll circle back to the other cards that we have here. So next on my list is Necria. So the invocation costs 3. This dragon's a little on the pricier side, also a 3 block. Transform target ash you control into Necria. Go again. Necria reads 4 base attack, 7 life. It's an enormous life total. And whenever Necria deals or is dealt damage, put a -1 life counter on her and create an ash token. I mean, that's an engine.
It is an engine.
If this doesn't get popped, the value is incredible, right? You're probably getting at least 2 ash out of it. You're sending another 4 breakpoint attack. The 7 life total, even with the minus life counters, is still going to necessitate them sending a 5 at it. If you swung it and it hits, and then they swing a 5 at it, it just dies. If you don't swing it or they block it out, then it's sitting on 6, and then they can't even kill it with 1 card.
Mm-hmm. I think at a baseline, this is going to generate you at least 2 ash, but is almost always going to get you 3 or 4.
Unless it gets popped at 2 ash minimum. I mean, I don't know. It's a good card.
Again, this is why you pick the poppers. The biggest drawback for this one is I think it's the most expensive one that we have on the list.
I think it is.
And I think 3 is kind of our
the line,
ceiling.
because that's the 1 card.
Right.
You know, it's got to be a blue, but it's still a 1 card payment. One more thing about
Necria.
Yeah.
We're cheating.
There's 12 dragons. Like, how are we going to keep
All
track of
funny
all
names.
of this? Yeah.
I don't remember what I was going to say.
I mean, it's good. It's good. I neglected to put this on the list originally, and then you had added
I think
it
it's
later.
pretty strong. There's also synergies with Uvia, which isn't great on its own, but you get those 2 together, and you're probably game winning.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the reason Uvia isn't actually on this list, and we're not really going to go over it, for the same reason that we're only talking about 4 of the 12 dragons, is, you know, in the limited environment and considering the speed of the format, it's just too slow to pay 2 cards to invoke any one of these dragons. Yeah. Any parting thoughts for our friend Necria?
No, but he's scary. I'll say that much.
Yeah, I mean, if those poppers are looking better and better by the day. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's look at our next one, the hardest to pronounce for me personally.
This one is brutal, yeah.
Invoke Vinserakai. Also a 3 crossed, because that is the most that we are willing to pay for these dragons. Vinserakai says, base 6 attack, 1 life, and whenever it hits a hero, he deals 3 arcane damage to them.
This card's incredible. It's my favorite dragon.
3 for 9?
Yeah, exactly.
3 for 9?
3 for 9, the invocation has go again. Play it at the end of your chain after they've exhausted their resources. You know, you probably can identify that they don't have a popper in their hand. You could wait for the opponent Iyslander to play out their arsenal, which now means they probably have no instant speed ways to damage an ally, and you're safe to send that 3 for 9. If any Magic players are watching, it's reminiscent of Ball Lightning. I don't know. I love this card. It's a game ender.
So I didn't put this on the list, but for me that was intentional because I'm constantly looking at this set now through Iyslander shaded glasses. Would you ever side this out against Iyslander?
I thought about it,
Yeah.
and then I unthought about it. Because I think that Iyslander in Limited essentially has no ways to deal instant speed damage to an ally that aren't playing a blue from Arsenal.
From Arsenal, right.
And so you just don't cast this if they have something in Arsenal.
Yeah, they give up so much of their ability to interact with this, the first thing that they want to target with that Arsenal card. So, yeah, I mean, we were discussing this earlier, and that was one of the first thoughts I had is like, I am terrified of putting 3 resources into something that Iyslander can deal with at instant speed the moment that I play it.
I think the key there is that Waning Moon can't target allies, and that makes it so much more playable into Iyslander.
I think in draft, if you're paying attention, right, and the Dromai didn't draft this before you saw it go around, as the Iyslander player, I'm aware this is in the pool now, so I'm thinking about it a little bit more, but I think you're right, there's just this little bit of cat and mouse thing that's going to go on, where you're probably going to attack with your Ash Wings first, and the Iyslander player is going to play their 1 damage probably to deal with an Ash Wing. So now that's made the decision for you, you're just going to Arsenal the what's he called?
Vincerakai?
Vincerakai? You'll just Arsenal
call
them
him Vince.
and try him later.
Right.
Most likely. Yeah.
Our good friend Vinny.
And at the end of the day, I mean, it's a red for the red things,
Sure.
makes an Ash, blocks 3. You know, it's doing all the other modes of a card you want
Yeah.
in Dromai.
Again, it's at the ceiling. 3 is about the most we're willing to pay for a dragon in this format.
Guys are stingy. Dragons are cool.
Dragons are cool. Turns out they're expensive.
Dragons are cool when you can play them.
Right.
Right. So those are the 4 dragons that we're including in the standout list for Draconic Illusionists. We're now going to go ahead and move on to our non-dragon buddies. These are going to be the cards that dictate most of your in-play experience, your play patterns. They're going to be the most impactful individual cards that bring together your synergies, your strategy, and are going to be, you know, the serviceable, like above average cards that pull you into this direction if you see them flowing around the draft table. So let's take a look at the first one here. It's going to be Billowing Mirage. It is a 1 cost. We're looking at red here, and it attacks for 3, blocks for 3. And when you attack with Billowing Mirage, transform up to 1 Ash you control into an Aether Ashwing. It says go again. Unconditional go again. Is that why that's on the list?
You're very astute in your observation.
Am I getting smarter?
You'll notice that many of the rest of these cards, with the exception of a few, are here because they're like the toolbox card for Dromai. Because there's a very specific type of card that you're looking for playing Dromai, and it's red cards with Go Again. Because they are going to turn on the rest of your dragons by being a red card, but more importantly, they have Go Again to lead into that. It's not enough just to play the red card. You also have to be able to do something after that to start coming in with your dragon. So unless it's an instant or an action with Go Again, just playing red with no Go Again is not good enough. So unconditional Go Again is ideal. That's your premium cards that you're looking for.
Just like Fi, but also not like Fi in that it doesn't need to be a combat chain link. So non-attack actions with Go Again are also fine. Instance, like Rylie said. It's a bit more flexible. You just want to start your turn with a red card that doesn't consume your action point, and also ideally furthers your game plan, which is why we started with Billowing Mirage here, because I believe it creates an Ash.
It actually transforms an Ash.
There's another attack just like it that creates an Ash.
Yeah. Right, and I mean, the fact that, the big difference I'm noticing here between Dromai and Fi, obviously they're both really competing for those unconditional Go Again cards, but once you're looking into class specific, the big upside here on this card is that, like you said, it's advancing your game plan. It's making that Aether Ashwing from your Ash token while providing you that starter, that unconditional Go Again. So makes a lot of sense. Let's move on to our next card here. We are looking at Embermaw Senpai. Embermaw Senpai at red reads, well, it's 2 resource cost. It has 8 attack and 3 defense, and it has Phantasm, so it can be popped if defended with a card with power 6 or more. And so when Embermaw Senpai is destroyed, create an Ash token.
This card is really, really powerful. I think originally we rated this quite high, and I think even after playing with the card, I'd put it even higher. This is like one of the best cards that you have access to in Dromai.
Yeah.
We should note So Phantasm cannot be triggered by illusionist blocking cards.
Right.
So you cannot use the Ember Maw Centipede to trigger Phantasm, even though it has 6 or greater attack, so that's just something I wanted to put out there. But even if this does happen to get popped by a Phantasm, I think you're pretty happy because it didn't get triggered on one of your dragons,
Right.
which is the alternative, and you still get an Ash. So you have an upside even if it does get destroyed and, ends your combat chain.
And you might have your boots. And it might be a great time to use your boots,
Sure.
especially if it was a red Ember Moth Centipede, because now your Dragon Go-Agains are turned on. Get your Ember Moth pop, top your boots, swing out your dragons, pretty good.
Get an Ash.
Right. I think also another reason we weren't originally so high on this and then we came up is because we didn't realize just how rare poppers are in this set. So the average sealed pool has less than 1 popper, I believe, is the math, and which means the average draft pool is going to have less than 4.
Right.
That means the average deck you play against is going to have like 0 or 1. Phantasm's pretty good in a format where no one can pop anything.
Draft your poppers, folks.
Yeah.
Draft responsibly.
So we already addressed yellow and red Fiendals, red Flex, and red Brothers, and the only other one is Majestic Thaw, which we'll talk about later, I
And
think.
Erase Face.
Yeah, and Erase Face,
Yeah.
okay.
Which
It's
are
also
both
Majestic,
Majestics,
yeah.
so-
It's pretty rare. to have
Very
a
rare.
popper.
8's a lot.
8
for
is
two
a lot.
resources.
Yeah.
If you can keep 2 cards and just send this back for 8 damage, you're pretty content with that exchange, I think.
Right.
Yeah, and again, the worst case scenario, making an Ash and then pitching a blue to your Stilettos. Because, I mean, if you're in the seat, you're drafting one
Yeah.
set of Stilettos,
Yeah.
right? All right, cool. Moving on from the Centipede, let's take a look at, I mean, this card is so powerful in this archetype. It's absolutely essential to building your engine and making this deck tick. It is Rake the Embers. I think at any color, but obviously red is at a huge premium. Rake the Embers is 1 resource cost. It is a Draconic Illusionist action that blocks for 2. And it says, create an Ash token, then transform up to 3 Ash you control into Aether Ash Wings. It has Go Again.
This might be the most crucial card to playing Dromai. This is the best rate for generating Aether Ashwings. Nothing creates more than this.
It's outrageous.
I will say the only downside is this requires you having at least 2 more Ash already in play to get the maximum benefit of generating into 3. But even if you can't do that, getting 1 or getting even 2 is still pretty good, as well as being red, having Go Again, and allowing you to swing with those dragons immediately after generating them, and all your other dragons that you have.
That said, you really only need 1 Ash out, right? Because you can pitch a red to Rake the Embers to make your second Ash,
Yes.
and then make your
So
third
that's
Ash off of Rake
with
the Embers.
this one you can.
That's a key
Correct.
difference
Yep.
between that and the invocations, and that this doesn't target, and the transformations happen on resolution. So
Exactly.
the Ash doesn't need to be there until the card resolves. So yeah, you're right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, starting with 1, like, the times that I sat down against my opponent, they had 1 Ash out in the arena, and then suddenly they had 3 Aether Ash Wings in the arena for 1 cost and 1 card.
This card could
It's
honestly
backbreaking.
win the game for you by itself against Iyslander, because Iyslander, first of all, the Ashwings give you Arcane Barrier, so she can't ignore them, and also she has a pretty hard time clearing them out. I think the only real way in a draft Iyslander deck you're going to be clearing multiple Ashwings is with Singe, which you might not always see.
Right.
Yeah, so Rake the Embers is just super good. Definitely draft multiples of this card, especially in red. I mean, what's the limit to how many you draft for your deck? Is there one?
This one's borderline unlimited.
It's like 100?
Like one of your best cards.
If there's a limit, you're probably not going to see it.
True. I mean, you're just not going to have access to as many as you'd probably play.
Okay.
Just draft them all in probably every color.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, not to put you guys on the spot, but like, what is a card that you could see at common or rare if you're in the Illusionist seat that you would draft over Rake the Embers?
If you're already Hardlock Illusionist, I don't even know if there is one. Barring a specific Majestic or Legendary, which we're not really going over here.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's the only thing that would pull you away from getting more Rake the Embers.
All right, pick up your Rake the Embers, pick them up in as many multiples as you possibly humanly can. Moving on to Silent Stilettos. This is our Illusionist equipment legs. Whenever an attacking ally you control dies, or an attack action you control is destroyed by Phantasm, popped, you may pay 3 resources. If you do, destroy Silent Stilettos and gain 1 action point. And this equipment has Arcane Barrier 1.
To be honest, I think the most relevant piece of text on this is probably the Arcane Barrier. But I think the additional effect of being able to continue a combat not a combat chain, but still be able to have actions after having a combat chain close by losing one of your dragons or maybe a Centipede is particularly relevant. Also, this is, because obviously this is reminiscent of Phantasmal Footsteps,
right.
but in a way it's even better because it doesn't have to be triggered off of Phantasm. So for example, if Iyslander shoots and kills one of your dragons mid-chain, you can still pay the 3 to get your action point back. So like I said, it doesn't have to be Phantasm. If you lose a dragon, this triggers, you have the option. But you're definitely going to want to think twice about whether you do it or not in the Iyslander matchup because that Arcane Barrier is really important.
Footsteps also doesn't give you an action point if an ally is popped. It's only an attack action card,
Sure.
which is going to become relevant in the future CC format.
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
another
Not a
big
topic
news-
for this video.
Speaking of topics for this video, though, I have a question for you.
Sure.
If your pool or draft pool contained these boots and quelling boots, would you play the quelling boots into the non-Iyslander matchups?
Did you get both?
Let's say you had both boots.
I would play the Quelling Boots, I think.
Okay.
Because like we discussed, there's so few poppers.
Right.
Like your opponent is honestly likely to have 0 to 1.
Right.
So they might not even get the 6 popper in the game that you play. So it's probably not even going to come up. In
Right.
a majority of the games, the Quell is probably going to come up more often. And then obviously the fact that if it dies versus being popped is irrelevant outside of the Iyslander matchup. There's no other way for them to die on your
turn.
own turn
Yeah.
unless you're playing against Iyslander.
Right.
So I think you would play you'd play the Quelling Slippers. I think the
Quelling
Quelling Slippers
Slippers, yeah.
over this in non-Iyslander matchups.
That's where my head was at, too.
Yeah.
Just came to mind.
All right, next up we have our Draconic Illusionist Equipment Arms. Silken Form. It reads, instant, destroy Silken Form, transform target Ash you control into an Aether Ashwing, and Silken Form also has Quell 1. I don't think that we've actually talked about what Quell is, so why don't we break that down really quick and then you can run us through this card.
Sure. So Quell is in the same vein as Arcane Barrier,
Sure.
but it works for any source of damage, whereas Arcane Barrier is strictly for arcane damage. The only difference is if you use the Quell, you will be losing that piece of equipment at the end of the turn. Arcane Barrier is more reusable replacement effect that you have more access to. But there's a little more nuance with the Silken Form where you could use the Quell and then maybe you could also use its effect to make yourself an Ashwing. But regardless, whenever you Quell, you have to pay the resource as a replacement to taking damage, and if you pay it, you can prevent one of the damage. If you have multiple pieces of equipment that all say Quell, you can pay multiple times to reduce that. But you can only trigger any individual piece of Quell once per source of damage. And as far as I'm aware, there's only Quell 1. We only have Quell 1 that
We have
exists
Quell 1
as
in
of
this
right
set,
now.
yeah.
Yeah. So there isn't any Quell 2 or 3 like there is for Arcane Barrier at this time. But beyond just talking about Quell, this card's really, really good. Quell is maybe an underrated, underutilized keyword in this format, and I think the additional benefit that you have of being able to Quell this and at instant speed generate yourself an Aether Ashwing makes this one of the best pieces of equipment in the set.
I think this set in particular, the limited formats in this set, highlight the value of not overblocking, and Quell allows you to perfectly not overblock, right? So you think about it, if you have a blue 3 block in your hand, I could Quell 3 and destroy my armor, or I could just block 3, right? Those aren't always made equally. Somebody sends you a 4 at you with a hit trigger, and you want to block 4, now you can do it exactly with Quell while floating 2 to Quell 2 additional things that turn. Especially against Fi, right? He's sending 1s and things like that at you. You don't want to block a 1 with a card.
Mm-hmm.
You want to block it with 1 resource. And like Rylie said, that the line of this being free and instant and allowing you to Quell 3 times and then make an Ashwing is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And even we mentioned very early on in the video, blues that block for 3 are premium. A lot of your blues only block for 2.
Right.
So being able to turn a blue into a block 3 in a circumstance
Absolutely.
where maybe 3 Aether Ashwings are going to be coming at you turns into overblocking by 1 into perfectly distributing 3 block across 3 attacks.
Or
on
even
the
a
chain
blue that doesn't
link.
block at all.
Sure.
Handful of those.
Yeah, exactly.
Even better. So Silken Form, look out for that. You obviously want to make sure that you end up your draft with one of these if you're in the Illusionist seat. Moving on from our equipment, we are going to go ahead and talk about Skittering Sands, specifically at red. Skittering Sands reads, it's 0 resource cost, and it blocks for 2. and it reads, transform target ash you control into an Aether Ashwing. It gains +3 attack until end of turn. Go again. The yellow would read +2 attack. The blue would read +1. I can already see why the red is at a premium, not only because red's turn so much on in Dromai, but the +3 is so much more relevant, of course.
Yeah. Again, this is a perfect 1-card hand that you play, and it turns on your army of Ashwings and Dragons. Not only that, but this is, although you can't directly see it, this is a 0 for 4, because the first Ashwing that you transform, doesn't even have to be that one, but whatever Ashwing you end up attacking with, I guess it does, because you have to give that specific one the +3, right?
So, right? Yeah.
So the first Ashwing that you attack with is a source of 4 damage that you paid 0 for, and has turned on all the rest of your Dragonlings preparing to attack your opponent.
There could be some cute lines where you don't send the 4 first, right?
You might,
send the 1,
yeah.
beta pop, and then try and activate your boots, but they're probably not going to pop it, but they take the 1. I don't know. There's some stuff there. This is almost like Invocation number 13. You're playing a red Go Again card to turn on your hero power. It's giving you a residual ally. That ally is going to have 4 attack, which is better than any of the 0-cost invocations. And then you still have an ally at the end of the turn that's probably going to die on your opponent's turn anyway.
That's actually a really good way to describe it.
Yeah.
Like I would draft this before I drafted Draconic Optimi.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So that's actually a really good comparison.
Great. If there's nothing more for Skittering Sands, let's move on to our friend Sweeping Blow. We're looking at the red here, Sweeping Blow, 1 resource cost, and it has a base attack of 3 and a defense of 3 as well. And when you attack with Sweeping Blow, create an Ash token, and it does say go again.
So the red Sweeping Blow is the one that I think is by far the most relevant, because again, it's that red with unconditional go again, with an upside of generating you more of the resources that you need to do the other things that you want to do in Dromai. And this one, does that one block for 3?
It blocks for 3.
Yeah, so it's just that one just gets even better. The blue one it's a blue that blocks for 3 also, so we're pretty happy with that.
This is, this is the sister card that we alluded to earlier of Billowing Mirage, and it's probably debatable which one's better. Maybe Billowing is better. I think making Ashwings is at a little bit more of a premium than making Ash, but it's still a fantastic combo starter.
This is a better turn 1 play.
Sure.
I think. So it's situational, yeah.
For sure. I mean, but Dromai does have the built-in ability to make Ash with her own ability, so being able to make those Ash Wings. But yeah, I mean, it's the same deal. It's unconditional go again, and it is moving you along your game plan, setting up your engine, and making sure that you're ready to take them down with little daggerons in the end game. All right, we missed a dragon earlier, so we're going to go over this one because it is worth mentioning. Of course, meeting the same restriction, self-imposed restriction of we don't want to pay more than 3 resources for a dragon. Invoke Thamai costs 2 resources. It's another dragon invocation. And Thamai reads 3 base attack and 4 life. Opponents can't play cards or activate abilities during your turn. I wonder who this is good against.
Do you want to take an educated guess?
I think it's Iyslander.
Yeah, Iyslander.
I think it's
hates
Iyslander,
this
yeah.
one. This is just despicable for Iyslander to deal with. As soon as this resolves, Iyslander's not doing anything else on your turn, and they're forced to have an actually tough time clearing that. They're going to have to waste one of their spells, one of their actions that they really want to send at you to the damage, because you have a limited number of the red spells to try to push damage to end the game. So if you're forced to use that to clear the Mai, you're just that much closer to being fatigued, running out of arcane damage sources. Extremely powerful against Iyslander. I don't think it's nearly as relevant in probably the mirror or against Thai. I don't even know if you would want to play it.
There are a lot of incidental benefits, and it's debatable whether they're good enough, but you can't play Oasis Respite, you can't play any of the DRs, you can't activate Phi's ability, you couldn't correct your Silken Form. There are a lot of things that this stops. They're all relatively minor, though.
Sure.
It's debatable. It probably depends on what the rest of your deck looks like, because it is a 2-cost dragon.
It is.
So it's, yeah.
I mean, at 2 cost, the fact that there are use cases outside of the very obvious application means you should probably pick it pretty highly, especially because
I think I blacked that one out because I had one of those played against me when I was playing Iyslander. I don't know how I managed to win that game. That was very difficult.
How did you win that game?
I did, like I said, I had to use like an Aether Hail to clear it, and it made the game last so much longer than it would have otherwise.
Well, that is going to wrap the Draconic Illusionist specific standout cards. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our Draconic Ninja Fi. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and talk about Fi, our Draconic Ninja. Once again, all of these cards that we're going to go through are the specific standout cards that are going to push you down that lane in your draft pod. You start to see these within your first 5 picks. It's probably the direction that you want to head in, or at least hedge on 1 or 2 of these cards, considering their power level and how essential they are to Fi strategy. You are going to see them in every game, either playing with or against Fi. So prepare for them and understand them. But before we get into the cards, let's talk about Fi specifically and go ahead and just read Fi, the hero. Of course, for intellect and starting life of 20, you may start the game with a Phoenix Flame in your graveyard. Important to note that you can have up to 3 Phoenix Flames in your starting deck. This is a token rarity card. And again, you can put up to 3 in the deck. 1 will begin in your graveyard. And Fi also reads once per turn instant for 3 resources. Return a Phoenix Flame from your graveyard to your hand. This ability costs 1 resource less for each Draconic chain link you control. Any opening statements on Fi? Set up some context before we actually jump into Fi specific cards to look out for.
Sure. So the Phoenix Flame then is a Draconic attack.
Yes.
Well, a Draconic attack action that if you've played it on the second Draconic link or higher, it gets +1.
Right.
It does not block. It only comes in red, and its base attack is 0.
Right.
So I think that's an important thing to note. But I mean, a lot of times when you're playing the Phoenix Flame, it's going to have the 1. But there are some niche circumstances where you might want to play it first as well.
Play it for 1 and then swing your blade on for 2.
Maybe even play it for 0. There are times where you would be incentivized to play it first to start your turn.
Yeah.
It gives you a last-ditch effort way to start your chain with unconditional go again, which obviously, as we talked about earlier during the Draconic cards, is very valuable in Fi. I also think that maybe a benefit of Phoenix Flame that goes under the radar a little bit is that you not only have to draft 27 playables, every Fi deck is going to run 3 Phoenix Flame. There's no chance you don't. So, I mean, that's huge in draft, right? You get 3 more picks that can go elsewhere.
Now, I want to go ahead and just for everyone's sake ask a very obvious question, because you glossed over it and it seems intuitive, but every Fi deck is running 3 Phoenix Flames. Let's just go ahead and take a moment to break down exactly why.
The whole engine runs on Phoenix Flame. You start with 1 in your discard pile. You have multiple cards in the deck that are going to retrieve them from the discard pile, including your hero power. Finding your rupture lines is almost always going to be off the back of 1 or 2 Phoenix Flames, usually 1 coming from the hero power and possibly a second one from a card effect like Flame Call Awakening we talked about before, or a couple other cards we'll talk about later. It's widening your combat chain, which is improving multiple different effects that we'll talk about in a minute here with these cards, and it's basically Fi's core game plan.
Play all 3.
Yeah. Well, a lot of decks in Flesh and Blood are designed and balanced around the hero's ability that's on the card. Without Phoenix Flames, Fi is just a blank piece of text. You would be better off playing any other hero, I think, at that point. So I think that's why you're incentivized to always run as many Phoenix Flames as you can. Otherwise, you're playing a blank hero, and any other hero would be a better alternative at that point.
Sounds good. Let's get into the cards. So our first standout Draconic Ninja card is Dust Runner Outlaw. We are looking at the red, of course, and it is 1 resource, 4 base attack, 2 defense, and you guessed it, it says go again.
It says unconditional go again.
1 for 4 go again.
This is Draconic Leg Tap, and Leg Tap was a playable card.
Yeah, it's not good, but it does exactly what you need.
I don't think we need to say anything more about that one. That's a very straightforward card.
Didn't give me enough time to pull up the next card.
It's an unconditional red, and text for 4, which happens to be a nice breakpoint.
Right.
At the very least, I will say that. So it's nice on the turns where you have a blue.
All right, let's take a look at something with a little more nuance, I suppose. Mounting Anger. Mounting Anger at red. This one's a rare, and it costs 1 resource. Base power 4, defense for 2, and when Mounting Anger hits, you may banish an attack action card from your hand with cost less than the number of Draconic chain links you control. If you do, it gains +1 attack, and you may play it this turn. Go again.
So notably, this is the same card we just talked about, but with the text. And the text is quite relevant. It's an additional power. You can play this as your combo starter, since it has unconditional go again, and it'll still allow you to banish a 0 cost. There are 0 cost 3 attacks in the game that we might talk about in a minute here that you can make 4, now giving you that 4 breakpoint on those cards' effects. So I mean, it's sneaky good. It's a great combo starter.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess the text really leads you to believe that you want to play this on chain link 2 or 3, but I mean realistically in Fi you're so low to the ground as far as your costs are concerned that you're playing as many 0s and 1s as you can get your hands
Hell,
on.
you can even banish a Phoenix with it.
Right.
This I will note the 4 breakpoint makes your opponent have to make a decision about this, right? Do you think the additional text on this matters if it's played first, or are they actually just playing a Dust Runner Outlaw with additional text? So I would say if Dust Runner Outlaw is leg tap plus, I would say what is Mounting Anger is leg tap plus.
Plus?
Right.
2 pluses for Mounting Anger.
2 pluses.
Yeah, I mean, every time I'm put in a position of deciding whether I want to block this card or not, now I'm just doing all sorts of crazy calculus trying to figure out what's in their hand and what the maximum damage output of their hand's going to be if they get another +1 here, and yeah, it's
You almost treat it as a 1 for 5, right? And maybe you're okay blocking 5 with 2 cards. It's not great.
If this is a 1 for 5 with go again, that's very powerful.
Amazing. Yeah.
Well, that's the ceiling, and that's what we should be striving to achieve with Mounting Anger. Our next card on the list is Rise from the Ashes. Okay, Rise from the Ashes is 0 cost at red. This is also rare. Okay, we're drafting rares for Fi here. The next Draconic or Ninja attack action card you play this turn gains +3. You may return a Phoenix Flame from your graveyard to your hand. Go again. So this is a non-attack action. It defends for 2, but it will get you that Phoenix Flame from your graveyard.
It's a non-attack action, so you are heavily incentivized to play this first before you start your combat chain. But it's going to retrieve your Phoenix Flame, assuming that you have one in the graveyard. Interesting thing to note is you don't have to immediately play that Phoenix Flame. You can pitch it to play another attack. And more often than not, I think you probably want to play the other attack, something that has a more relevant breakpoint or a hit trigger, maybe the Mounting Anger. You play the Mounting Anger first, and now your Mounting Anger is coming in for 7.
That's too
and
many.
you have the Phoenix Flame that your opponent is aware of that you can banish to
That's
come
going
in
to come in for 3?
2 at that
1.
point.
Oh.
The Mounting Anger would give it the +1,
Right, exactly,
and
yes,
then
yeah.
it gets 1 from
So
itself.
We're mathing, baby. We're mathing.
You're always incentivized not to play the Phoenix Flame first, right? Because it's going to come in for 0 base instead of 1. So Riley's exactly right. Another thing with this card, and I think Ninja cards in general, is the non-attack actions are always... You always have to think twice, right? You don't want to be playing non-attack actions because they're not chain links. But this one, I think, breaks the mold, and it's essentially like a floor of 4 damage for 0, red with go again. It's hard to beat.
Yeah, I mean, it replaces the chain link that it's not creating, right?
Sure, yeah.
So,
And it's card neutral.
Yeah.
You play it, and you get a card back with a massive upside. So, yeah, it's like a 0 for 4 with a significant upside.
Right.
And it's card neutral. That's really good.
that's a good rate to me. All right. Moving on to our next card is Rising Resentment. So Rising Resentment at red, common, 0 cost. When Rising Resentment hits, base attack 3, blocks for 2. When Rising Resentment hits, you may banish an attack action card from your hand with cost less than the number of Draconic chain links you control. If you do, it costs 1 resource less to play, and you may play it this turn. Go again.
This card's fantastic. So this is exactly what I had in mind when we were talking about Rising Anger. Banishing this with Rising Anger, especially the red one, gives you a 0 cost 4 go again with a highly relevant hit trigger that also then disincentivizes them to block it because of that breakpoint. And if they don't block it, you're now playing your next attack at a 1 reduced cost. Now almost all of your attacks cost 0 or 1, so making a 1 a 0 is also fantastic. And we talked earlier about Sash of Sandakai, right? About how that 1 extra resource in a big Fi turn is huge. This is another source of that effect.
Play your breaking point for free.
Yeah.
Yeah. Turns out that's pretty good.
All right, the next couple of cards we're going to take a look at here are extremely similar. We're looking at Ronin Renegade Red as well as Brand with Cinderclaw. Let me just go ahead and read both of these cards off. Ronin Renegade is a 0 cost at red. It's a 0 for 3, blocks for 2. It says go again on it. And Brand with Cinderclaw is a 0 for 3 that blocks for 2, but also reads your next attack this combat chain is Draconic in addition to its other card types. And says go again. So both 0 for 3s with go again, both block for 2, Brand with Cinderclaw with the additional text that helps you kind of smooth out your Draconic chain links.
These are the sister cards to Dust Runner Outlaw and Mounting Anger, taking a lot of inspiration from Head Jab.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have to say a whole lot more about them other than we have Head Jab, and then we have Head Jab Plus at Ronin Renegade, and then Brand with Cinderclaw is Head Jab Plus Plus.
I will say that Brand with Cinderclaw's text in Limited is pretty weak. You might find a line where you're playing this into a trade-in from Arsenal, which isn't a very good card to begin with. But there aren't a whole lot of things where you're going to get a whole lot of value out of turning them into Draconic in the Limited format.
Scar for a Scarf, you're really far behind.
Scar for a Scar.
There's not a lot of generic cards in the set that say go again.
Right.
So I think it's Scar for a Scar and Trade-In
Yeah.
might be the only ones that I can think of.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's some crazy niche scenario where you're sending a Draconic Fyendal's Fighting Spirit, then retrieve a free Phoenix Flame to Arsenal, and that's a turn.
Sure.
But you don't want to be doing that.
Probably not.
All right, moving on. We are looking at Soaring Strike in red. Soaring Strike costs 1. It has a base attack of 4, and it blocks for 2. When Soaring Strike hits, you may banish an attack action card from your hand with cost less than the number of Draconic chain links you control. If you do, it gains Go Again, and you may play it this turn, and itself has Go Again. Lot to go again.
Is that another leg tap I see? I mean, how do you feel about this one?
It's a leg tap plus minus.
That's kind of how I feel about it too.
The hit effect is a lot less relevant. You're mostly looking to grant things Go Again for the first chain link. So on the subsequent ones, you probably already have Go Again on everything you plan on playing. So the banish effect becomes worse.
I think the weird thing with this card is a lot of the cards that you're drafting already say Go Again anyway.
Yeah.
And the ones that don't say Rupture.
Yeah.
And you're ending your turn with Rupture.
Yeah.
So the only thing you're probably doing after playing your Rupture card is maybe getting a Phoenix Flame.
Maybe.
And unless that last one's presenting lethal, you're going to Arsenal that Phoenix Flame anyway. So
Yeah.
the additional benefit of the Go Again seems way less relevant than Mounting Anger's hit trigger,
Right.
kind of like Ciro was saying.
Yeah, it sounds like the text box is relatively empty, and the fact that it's just a 1 for 4 with Go Again on it, like you just need a critical mass of
Right.
these cards with unconditional Go Again to make your game plan work, and that's the biggest
Turns
reason
out
why.
you should just draft all the leg taps.
If it says Go Again on it and it hits your opponent, you should pick it up if you're playing 5.
For sure.
It's as simple as that. I mean, that's the common thread in all these cards, and now we're going to actually take a look at some non-attacks, essentially. So let's go ahead and take a look at the last card on our list that isn't in equipment, which is going to be Rapid Reflex. And I included the blue one here, but Rapid Reflex, at 1 cost, it's a ninja attack reaction, and the blue target attack action card with cost 0 gains +1. This also defends for 3. At yellow, it adds +2. At red, it adds +3. But I personally included the blue here for flexibility. Like, if you really are needing to push an on-hit effect, the blue is going to provide you the most flexibility possible, and I mean, I think that is pretty straightforward, right?
It's a blue that blocks for 3. I mean, we've mentioned that theme a couple times now. I think for that reason, it's probably the most playable. I will say it is quite limited in things that you actually want to target with this, because almost all the things that cost 0 don't have hit effects. If you notice, the hit effects are almost always stapled onto the one attacks or
Rising
higher.
Resentment's probably
The
the highlighted
ruptures,
example.
correct, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but we have mentioned that there's not a lot of ways to respond in the chain link in this set other than Quell.
Right.
So this alone might push somebody to Quell if it presents lethal, and that might take a card away from them, blow some resources. There's some value there.
I mean, it's bad Razor Reflex, essentially, right?
Yeah, significantly.
But
yeah.
in Limited, it's an attack reaction in a set with very limited ways to deal with attack reactions. And I think the red one could be your finisher card, your kill card. It's all right.
There's a kind of neat interaction that I guess you could do, because you can play this on a Phoenix Flame,
Sure.
And you could Heat Wave and Phoenix Flame with these together and potentially give like a +2 for a breakpoint.
Send a
maybe
0,
in
they
the
don't
game.
block, make it 5. Yeah.
Sure, right, something
4.
nuts. I mean, if it's red one,
Yeah.
they're not going to see that coming most likely. Yeah.
Yeah, but it does seem very narrow, and like, while this is an inclusion, I think it's just, especially a blue in its flexibility, and the fact of the matter is, like you mentioned, there are so few targets, and the cost of 1 for an attack reaction is like, 1 is so much greater than 0. We
Yeah.
all know how much more expensive 1 is than 0, and the situations in which I actually want to spend a resource on this card are insanely narrow.
I think you'd rather use your Sash of Sandakai to play Breaking Point.
Sure.
In most circumstances.
Or to rapid reflex your Lava Burst for 8.
I mean, that would be pretty good. If you managed to get all the way there and you still had the resource, yeah, you've won that game, I think, at that point.
Well, you just mentioned Heat Wave, so let's go ahead and talk about it now. We're going to take a look at our equipment real quick. Heat Wave is our Draconic Ninja Equipment Arms, and it reads instant, destroy Heat Wave, Phoenix Flames you control gain +1 until end of turn, and it also has Quell 1.
Mm-hmm. This card is very powerful. Even if you're only giving it +1 to 1 Phoenix Flame, I think it's very good. It allows you to play your Phoenix Flame first and have it still come in for 1, or any subsequent Phoenix Flames coming in for 2. It suffers from a different problem that the Silken Form does, where you're not going to get both of these benefits, because you are probably not going to be quelling on your turn except for against Iyslander. So it's going to be a lot harder for you to utilize both sides of it. You're going to probably be forced to either use the Quell or use it for the plus damage to the Phoenix Flames. But either way you use it, you get a lot of value out of it.
I think you can often find turns where you can get 2 damage out of this, and it can be pretty impactful.
I agree.
All right. Last standout card for our Draconic Ninja is our last piece of equipment, and we're taking a look at Tide Flippers. Tide Flippers reads, attack reaction, destroy Tide Flippers, target attack action card with 2 or less base attack, gains Go Again, and it also has Arcane Barrier 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're pretty much just skipping the first section of text here and just looking at the Arcane Barrier. This is borderline mandatory to play against Iyslander. The games you win are maybe 50% of the time are going to be pushed to winning because of having Tide Flippers versus not having Tide Flippers against Iyslander. I really can't even think of a scenario where you'd want to use that first line of text, and you'd probably just play Quelling Slippers into not Iyslander.
Yeah. It's hard to come up with something, right? There's probably some niche thing where you need to send like a trade and give it Go Again. But
send your blue Critical Strike first and
There might be
give it Go Again, right? Because it's just
It's 2 or less.
Oh no, Critical Strike's 3, so it doesn't even work.
2 or less. These
Forget
cases
it.
are so extremely limited.
Forget it.
So I was thinking of something that came up earlier, not to backtrack too much, but with Heat Wave, Heat Wave can be used as an attack reaction since it's instant, and if you make it to the end, so 5 mirrors can come down to really grindy end states, right? Where you're like just blocking and sending 1 attack, blocking and sending 1 attack, and you're trying to find a way to break symmetry. One of the ways you can break symmetry is opening your chains with Phoenix Flames for 0 and forcing your opponent to block it. But if they block it, you don't crack the Heat Wave. If they don't block it, you crack the Heat Wave and win the game. So you're constantly stripping cards with a 0 attack, and it can help you break symmetry and close out these stalemates.
Is that an incentive to hold your Heat Wave until late game in
I think
a
it might
5
be.
mirror
In
match?
the mirror, yeah. Well, I think that covers everything that we wanted to discuss about our Draconic Ninja Phi. Go wide, go again, go again, go again, go again, go
Like
again. Go again.
Like tap.
Like tap. All right, so next on the docket, we are our long-awaited queen, our deep and wonderful love, Iyslander. She's our ice wizard of the set, and we wanted to get to her last because I think we have a lot of collective experience now over this first weekend playing with Iyslander, but also because she just plays so differently and has a completely and fundamentally separate card pool when it comes to deck building and play style. So let's go ahead and get started with Iyslander so we can move towards wrapping up our limited set review. All right, last but not least, bringing us home, our very favorite Ice Queen, Iyslander. So before we get into her specific standout cards, the cards that are very much going to define the construction of her deck and her draft seat at the table, let's go ahead and talk about Iyslander, the hero. Who is she? What does she love? So, Essence of Ice. You may have ice cards in your deck. She has 4 intellect and her starting life total is 18. Now, she says if it's not your turn, you may play non-attack action cards with blue color strips from your arsenal as though they were an instant. Whenever you play an ice card during an opponent's turn, create a frostbite token under their control. Break it down. What's her deal?
So Iyslander is probably the premier hero of this format, who's looking to, be the foil to the fast red matters decks of Fi and Dromai by trying to give them the frostbites, trying to hit them with arcane damage, and do things like making them discard cards or pay additional resources. The frostbite is an aura that whenever you give it to an opponent, they have to pay an additional resource to do whatever their next action or activated ability is. And if you can stack them, for example, giving someone 3 frostbites, the next thing they want to do costs the normal amount plus 3 for all the frostbites. And is the only hero in the set that can interact to deal damage at instant speed. So on the opponent's turn, and arcane damage, and the only way to prevent the arcane damage is through prevention sources such as Oasis Respite, Quell, Arcane Barrier, and Ward, which is another mechanic that we haven't really talked about because it's not great.
Okay.
For the most part, but there are ward cards that will prevent the next damage source, so Arcane Barrier is something that can be prevented by ward as well.
All right, let's start knocking down the standout cards for Iyslander, specifically obviously the balance of elemental wizard cards and the ice cards that you're going to need to fuse them. So the first card we have on our list here is Frosting. We have the full cycle of Frosting here, the most relevance likely being the red and the blue, but it's cost 0 and it blocks for 3. We know that 3 defense is meaningful, and it reads deal 3 arcane damage to any target.
And it's ice, which is particularly relevant because you can use it for fusing your elemental wizard cards that want you to reveal an ice card to get an additional benefit. This card's really good. It costs 0. It comes in for 3 at red, so you play it on your turn. You arsenal the blue one to ping for 1 arcane damage and give them a frostbite at instant speed, hard for the opponent to interact with. I would take probably like 8 of these in blue if I could get it. Like, this is by far one of the best blue ice cards, and it's competing with a lot of really good blue ice cards. They're almost all good, but this one's amazing. You have anything to say about Frosting?
Just, you're gonna notice a theme where these 0 and 1 cost cards in this vein are at a premium because Waning Moon, which we didn't describe yet, costs 2, and being able to play an on-attack action and cast your Waning Moon for a single blue pitch is valuable. Also, Frosting, as you said, any target. This can clean up, in blue can clean up either Ashwings, and red can clean up almost any dragon you play in limited, so pretty good.
I guess we should take the opportunity just to say what Waning Moon does. You don't even have to look it up, I can just tell you. But basically you pay 2 resources, and on your turn you get to deal 2 arcane to your opponent, and on your opponent's turn, if you activate it, you get to deal 3 at instant speed. The only requirement is you have to have played a non-attack action first before you can activate the Waning Moon. So I guess obviously red and blue are usually your more desirable cards, but I will say yellows become more relevant in Iyslander because a yellow by itself pays for the Waning Moon. So although you don't generally want a high threshold or mass of yellows, you can get a lot of utility out of yellows in Iyslander specifically.
Yeah, you get away with those yellows when you have cards like Frosting, and picking those 0 cost ice cards at a premium, arsenaling those blue 0 costs are going to allow you to get off that disruption, get that needed frostbite out, deal that arcane damage, or set up whatever ice effect you have there, and then come in with the Waning Moon with a yellow. It's good stuff.
Right.
Cool. So now that we've broken down Waning Moon and we've seen the first of our ice cards, let's go ahead and start barreling through the list here. The next card on our list, another ice card, is Ice Bolt. Again, we're always going to continue to prioritize the red and the blue of the cycle. The red just being the most powerful effect that you're going to be playing on your turn, and the blue that you're going to be able to flexibly play from arsenal or use as a pitch card. But Ice Bolt at 2 resource cost is an ice wizard action that blocks for 3, and the text says deal 5 arcane damage to any target.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the blue will come in for 3, of course.
And yellow for 4. You do need a number of these cards that come in for 4 or ideally 5 arcane damage in your deck just to try to end a game. This card is really good. 5 is almost, like we said before, is almost impossible for your opponent to deal with. Even if they Oasis or Ward for it, they're still going to need an Arcane Barrier or a Quell on top of that to avoid the entire breakpoint. Now, this one doesn't do anything if it deals damage, but I don't think that really matters, especially this card going first. For example, you play this for 5 and then Waning Moon behind it for another 2. Push through 7 arcane damage is really powerful. It's a nice for fusing. It blocks for 3. This card is extremely good. I would take a lot of these given the opportunity.
I guess the one drawback is it costing 2.
Correct.
Means you can no longer cast it and Waning Moon for a single card pitch.
Mm-hmm.
At least, well, the caveat being the chest we'll talk about later can enable that. But also you'll notice that Frosting is 0 cost 3/2/1 arcane damage over the pitch cycle. This is 2 cost 5/4/3, and then we're going to talk about another card in a minute that's 1 cost 4/3/2.
Mm-hmm.
And these are kind of your bread and butter because they all block for 3 and they're all ice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I mean, especially in the Iyslander Mirror, the game that we played, you having access to red ice bolts that I didn't have access to in the same draft pod made an unbelievable difference. And another reason why it's important that we note that these are these standout cards that really dictate the experience that you have in your draft and what you should be looking out for to make sure that your lane is open for the hero that you're trying to draft. Something that I really misevaluated in that draft pod where I 0-3'd with Iyslander in the same pod that Rylie's 3-0ing is I'm seeing all of these elemental wizard actions. I'm seeing these great payoff cards at yellow, some at red, and I still see them coming around pick 6, pick 7, but the thing that I wasn't seeing were the red ice bolts and the premium blue ice cards, and just it being my first draft of the format, not recognizing that those are the priority standout cards that we're going to continue to see the theme of here. That is what dictates whether this deck is viable and open. Just because you see that multitude of ice wizard actions or just wizard actions doesn't mean that your seat is actually available for Iyslander. So keep that in mind as we go through these standout cards, because that specifically red ice bolt, not seeing them made my deck so much worse, and whenever I stared them down from my opponent, it felt real bad because I didn't have the tools to do anything about it and I couldn't race it.
Mm-hmm. Iyslander is also going to be the most dangerous, or however you want to phrase it, hero to commit to, because it's harder to pivot off of. When you commit to Iyslander, you better have a pretty good read or you could find yourself in a lot of trouble.
I agree. Can you do Aether Hail next?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the middle card to
Keep it
go
in
with.
the
The Frosting and the Ice Bolt.
All right, well, we got Aether Hail up on the screen. At red, we're looking at 1 cost, deal 4 arcane damage to any target, blocks for 3, like Ciro was mentioning, part of this cycle of 0, 1, and 2 cost ice wizard actions. So again, the red dealing 4 arcane damage, the yellow dealing 3 arcane damage, the blue dealing 2 arcane damage. And again, an ice card for fusion, and the blue from Arsenal making the frostbite on your opponent's turn.
Yeah, this is actually the best one to have when you have a high density of blues. If you have 50% of your deck being blue, you want probably more Aether Hails than the other, because it means you just pitch your blue and then you can combine it with the Waning Moon for the highest outcome of damage per resources invested. What I would say, the Frostings and the Ice Bolt are a little bit better if you don't have as many blues as you would like, because then you can utilize those yellows to pay for them and maybe not use the Waning Moon alongside of it. But they're all good, and I think you'll notice on the list, I think I've included just about every ice card other than Eisenhower Weathervane. Yeah, it's not easy to make work in limited. But I think every ice card just about is on here. If you actually want to go to, we can do Arctic Incarceration and Cold Snap as well.
Sure, let's
These
go ahead
ones
and
just
pull
don't
them.
deal arcane damage.
Let's pull them up, and that is tough. But you obviously you play so many blues, and I think these cards specifically at blue, Arctic Incarceration and Cold Snap, because another thing that I was finding in my suboptimal Iyslander seat was desperately needing ice cards to turn on the fusion effects and the payoffs that I was drafting. And when you only run into the reds of these cards, you just lose so much power, you lose so much efficiency. And so, while, you can pick up a red Arctic Incarceration, blue is where you want to be for all of these ice cards. For the ice cards that aren't attacking, right?
Agreed.
So Arctic Incarceration is a 0-cost ice action, blocks for 2. The red creates 3 frostbites under target hero's control. The yellow creates 2 frostbites. The blue creates 1 frostbite. Again, blue being the bread and butter. You play it on your opponent's turn. You create the frostbite from Icelander's ability. Then you create the frostbite from Arctic Incarceration. 2 frostbites for a 0-cost blue is where you want to be.
Mm-hmm. The important thing to note about this card is it doesn't have go again. So you have to pair whatever you want to do in addition to it, either prior to utilize the go again and then go into the Arctic Incarceration, or it has to be at instant speed after that. The blue one is just so powerful because when you play it out of Arsenal on your opponent's turn, it ends up giving them 2 frostbites, which can really disrupt your opponent's turn, like a fire or a Dromai. Probably completely change the course of the turn that they wanted to play.
Yeah, every time that I was delivering 2 or 3 frostbites to an opponent, their turn tended to just end right there.
Yep.
They just didn't see the point in paying the tax. That moved to Arsenal, and then I get to keep whatever I've got left, right? So the next card in this grouping here, ice actions that don't attack but that you want to grab at a premium. Blue Cold Snap, it costs 1. It blocks for 2, and the text says target hero may pay 1 resource if they don't freeze a card in their arsenal or an ally they control until the start of your next turn. To clarify on freeze, I'll read the text here. A frozen object can't be played or activated. Then it says if Cold Snap is played from Arsenal, draw a card, and it also says go again.
Mm-hmm. And it happens to be ice. I think the blue one here is far and above the best. The yellow and red are actually maybe, I don't want to call them unplayable, but they're significantly worse because you're usually trying to play this on your opponent's turn to give them a frostbite as well as replace itself, because when it's played from Arsenal, it draws a card. And you can't do that with the red or yellow. Only the blues can be played from Arsenal. The top portion of text for this, as far as freezing, is not often relevant, but when it is, it makes the card even better than it would be otherwise.
I do not like the red and yellow. I honestly, as much as Eisenhower Weathervane isn't great in this format, I'd almost play blue Weathervane over red or yellow Cold Snap, just because you can play it out of Arsenal and staff behind it.
Yeah, I don't think I'd disagree with that.
Yeah.
I can tell you the red is unplayable. Every time you're forced to put that into your arsenal to then wait and hope that you can play it on your next turn, not on your opponent's turn, just feels so terrible. And I can't stop harping on the fact that if you misjudge your seat in Iyslander, the amount that you get punished in your deck quality is so devastating, because having a critical mass of ice cards that are not blue just ruins your ability to do what Iyslander is designed to do. Okay, so what are we touching on next here? Did we already go over Aether Dart?
We should do. We can do Ice Eternal, and then we can do the wizard cards.
Okay, let's go ahead and get to Ice Eternal here. Yeah, this is our last ice card that we want to go over.
Well, this one's technically not ice.
Oh, right.
But this is Elemental Wizard.
Well, Ice Eternal is at rare, and its cost is XX, and it is a blue pitch. And it is Iyslander Specialization. So you can only have it in your Iyslander deck, of course. But it reads, it has Ice Fusion, and it reads, create X Frostbite tokens under target hero's control. Then, if Ice Eternal was fused, deal arcane damage to that hero equal to the number of Frostbites they control. And to be clear, the fusion is an additional cost where you reveal an ice card to fuse the Ice Eternal that you're playing.
This card was extremely powerful for me. And I would, more than once, I would just sit this in my arsenal and block out until I drew a hand of mostly blues. And then I would cast it and give my opponent, 4 or 5 frostbites, fuse it on top of that. So they were effectively doing nothing else for the rest of their turn, and they were taking 4 or 5 arcane damage. So either they had the pitch to try to deal with the arcane damage, which they would be incentivized to do because they're not playing anything for the rest of their turn, and effectively reset the board state in my favor, or I would just use it to end the game on the spot. It's really, really, really strong card.
All right, what's next?
Can we talk about, Aether Dart? A good one.
All right, Aether Dart is a wizard action. This is not ice and it's not elemental. It is just a straight up wizard action. And the cycle red, yellow, and blue costs 0. It deals 3 arcane damage to any target. At red, at yellow, it deals 2 arcane. At blue, it deals 1. It also blocks for 3.
Mm-hmm. This is a slightly worse frosting because it doesn't say ice.
Right.
And that's exactly how I'm going to evaluate it.
Yeah.
Yep. It accomplishes all the same things that frosting does. It just doesn't give them a frostbite when you play it from Arsenal. But for all the other purposes, it's effectively the same. And you can't fuse.
Right.
Use it as fusing reveal. Yeah.
Little else to say about that. We've got ourselves a powerhouse up next. Aether Ice Vein. Let's just go ahead and read it. At red, 3 cost. It does have ice fusion. It's an elemental wizard action. And the text says deal 5 arcane damage to any target. If Aether Ice Vein was fused and deals damage to a hero, they discard a card unless they pay 2 resources. It blocks for 3.
Mm-hmm. This card is extremely powerful if you manage to play it and fuse it. You don't even always have to fuse it. Just coming in for that 5 arcane, like we were talking about earlier, is usually good enough. But when you can fuse this might be the best card in Iyslander that you're going to get at seeing it often at the rarity that it is. The blue one is also actually really good to play out of Arsenal to interrupt an opponent's turn. If you can play it out and fuse it, it's just going to completely change what they want to do over the course of a turn. Because dealing with 5, as we said, is nearly impossible.
Yeah.
But dealing with 3 when you've already committed partially to your turn is equally difficult.
That 3 is highly likely to be 6 because assuming you were going to fuse it, that fusion card can then become the resources to Waning Moon.
Precisely.
Yeah, this card's good.
Yeah, it's very strong. And it blocks for 3!
I mean, and you'll still play the yellow. The yellow
For
is
sure.
like absolutely strong enough. So you want to pick up basically this entire cycle. Again, always incentivized to pick up the red or the blue, but we know that there are applications for pitching yellow cards in this deck, and the yellow is good enough at 4 arcane damage with the fusion.
I guess the one thing to highlight that's just a small thing is if you send this at an ally, the fusion effect does not apply, even if you fuse it.
Yeah.
Right. All right, another elemental wizard action coming up, and this one's specifically just at blue, and probably limited and matchup dependent, but we're looking at Brain Freeze. It is, like I said, elemental wizard action, 0 resource cost ice fusion. Target opponent reveals their hand. If Brain Freeze was fused, put an action card with cost 0 from their hand on top of their deck. This card blocks for 3.
Like I mentioned before, there's a threshold of blues that you need to get to be able to pilot Iyslander proficiently. I'm saying if you 50% of your deck, ideally, you want to be blue. So this is one of the better blues. It's based on that because it blocks for 3. You can play it out of Arsenal, and if you play it against Fi and you time it appropriately and you wait for them to fetch out their Phoenix Flame, or maybe somehow you have additional information, you know they have a 0 in their hand, playing that, fusing it, can again completely change their turn. It prevents them from arsenaling a Phoenix Flame, getting to the 4th chain for Rupture, things like that. I think this is a higher skill card, knowing when to play it, whether you should sit on it, play it early to try to get more information. But I think if you play this card effectively, it's actually very strong.
This is one where non-blue falls off a cliff, too.
Absolutely. Yellow and red are borderline unplayable, I would say.
Yeah.
At the very least, they block for 3 at the end of the day.
Right.
But still quite bad. Yeah.
All right, this card seems to be a little contentious. Let's go ahead and pull this up. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys disagree on this one. Blue, Read the Ripples. Specifically,
Yes.
Blue, Read the Ripples. Read the Ripples is a 0 cost. It's a wizard action aura. It reads, at the beginning of your end phase, destroy Read the Ripples, then opt 1 and draw a card. It blocks for 2.
This card
Oh, we got our first one. All right, so I'll say my piece, and then you can contest me. Again, blues are so important to have. Blue non-attactions are non-attack actions are really good. They're your premium to Arsenal. And I'm really high on cards that are card neutral. They replace themselves. This is at a delay, so I wish it was draw and win play, for example. But you get, after you resolve it, you get to opt, you get to look at your top card, and you get to draw that before drawing up, so you have the option of arsenaling that. So ideally, what you're looking for is you're looking for a good arsenal target, so you can put it in your arsenal and set up your following play. I don't think this is the best blue that you have access to, but I think it's one of those toolbox cards that might help you actually fuel a better play later if you can set it up.
This is 2 block, correct?
This one is 2 block. I wish it said 3.
Sub titanium bauble.
Yeah.
And also the card draw is only on your end phase, correct?
Correct.
So I think it lines up poorly with what you want to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
If you play it on your opponent's turn, you're not getting the card till the end of your turn.
Mm-hmm.
If you play it on your turn, you're not getting it at the end of your turn, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're incentivized to dump your hand because you're going to draw during the end step, and then you're going to be forced to arsenal what you drew. And if what you arsenal isn't blue, it's going to be stuck there until your next main phase. So I think on first read, it sounds nice, but what it ends up doing is making you arsenal things you don't want to arsenal.
I hear that, and as you guys are talking about this, like I'm just like looking, I'm thinking about a use case or a play pattern in which you're really behind as the Iyslander player, and you are just losing cards from hand, trying to block your Fi opponent and figuring out how you're going to stabilize. And I feel like playing this, like having this arsenaled, is like a nice little safety valve to help you catch back up when you have 1 card left in hand, which like you keep a yellow to play your Read the Ripples at instant speed and still get a Waning Moon attack, and then have an empty hand and still be able to arsenal. And in the worst case scenario on your next turn, even if you're not arsenaling a blue that allows you to play at instant speed on your opponent's next turn, at the very least you're creating an opportunity to catch back up, find some kind of action so that you're not totally card depleted, resource depleted, when you're on the back foot trying to inch your way back into a game that you're behind in.
Yep.
So like, I feel like it can save the day, but I don't know if that's too narrow or you're counting on being so far behind.
This card made me think more than probably any other card, especially when I had it stuck in hand, because I had to think about how much can I block so that I can resolve this card and still, if I want to do anything else with it, and still get that additional card then for arsenaling. I actually preferred playing this on my own turn most of the time, saving this and maybe one other card so I can do this and Moon and then get my other additional card. This card required more planning than I wish it did, and I actually think this card's better when you're ahead. Because it helps you push an advantage if you already have it by helping you set up for more 5-card hands when you've already had 5 or 4-card hands to do things that you want to block out and go positive on those turn cycles, trading more damage than you're receiving. But I agree. I think under a lot of circumstances it's worse than a lot of the other blues.
Would you rather play this card or blue sifting?
On which turn?
What would you rather see in your pool?
I think I would rather, surprisingly, take this.
Okay.
But I think it's not always better. There's going to be circumstances where you would have preferred to have blue sifting.
Like anytime you're blocking?
Correct. Like anytime you need to block, you'd rather have the sifting. But I think the brain freeze not the brain freeze, sorry. We're talking about Read the Ripples?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's just a high skill play with Read the Ripples. I think there's a lot of room there to use your agency, making good choices with the opting, planning out your blocking and your follow-up turns, reading the turn cycles. So you can get a lot out of this card. But like we were saying before, yellow and red are horrible. I don't think you really ever want... Those are really win more cards, more so than this one. So you cannot account to always be ahead in the game and
honestly
play 1 more cards.
It blows my mind that they aren't opt 3 and opt 2. They are opt 1, opt 1, opt 1.
Significantly
which
worse.
is significantly worse. It's a flavor thing, right? Because it's ripples. That's cute.
Sure.
But yeah, they're awful.
Yeah, really bad.
Well, I would say the jury's out on this card because it's a little too big brain, and maybe we're making it harder on ourselves than we need to, and like it's easier to just not include this card in your deck.
Potentially.
Like, the fact that you need a critical mass of blues means that it behooves you to figure out the use cases and learn how to maximize the tools available to you, because if you're stacking your deck with blues, it's not like you're loaded up with the most powerful possible tools. I don't know, try playing with the card. Let us know what you think in the comments about it, because it's the one card that none of us really seem to fully understand whether it's something we can maximize and figure out how to leverage, or it's something that we should just steer clear of. But
I will say it's close enough to the line that you're going to end up being forced to play it some of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll figure out for yourself how good or not it is.
Mm-hmm.
okay, moving on to our next card, Sigil of Permafrost. So, Sigil of Permafrost is one of the few defense reactions in the set, and it's at rare. It's an elemental wizard defense reaction. We'll talk about the cycle, but looking at the red card first, Sigil of Permafrost is 1 cost. It says Ice Fusion, and it says if Sigil of Permafrost was fused, the next time you deal arcane damage to a hero this turn, create that many frostbite tokens under their control. And the defense reaction is for 4 at red, 3 at yellow, and 2 at blue.
Discounting any of the text for fusing this card is just really good because we're limited in defense reactions and prevention in the reaction phase. Within this format, if you are able to fuse it and you are able to use that ability, that's incredibly strong. It also works with Waning Moon. So it requires a lot of setup because you're probably going to have to play a 0-cost blue from Arsenal and then do the defense reaction and then utilize the Waning Moon to have everything come together and, really be the coup de grace that you're looking for. But I think at a baseline, just using it as the defense reaction is good enough with a potential very large upside.
This card is fantastic in all 3 colors, and I think the key to properly utilizing it is not arsenaling it, which is probably not what you're used to with defense reactions. Because what you want to do is play it from hand. There's essentially no dominate in the format anyway. Play it from hand, fuse it, play your blue thing from Arsenal, and have that thing get the fusion effect. The backup plan there is the Waning Moon for 3. You still need to play a non-attack action to activate your Waning Moon, so this becomes a really expensive opponent's turn. But firing off any amount of arcane damage under the effect of this fusion on top of blocking for its block value is great. And you get to utilize your pitch efficiently, right? Because this only costs 1. Ideally, you pitch to blue, you're floating 2. You can either Waning Moon with that or play your Arsenal, whatever. It's great.
Yeah, I had a hard time figuring out how to play with this card when I didn't have enough, blue ice cards in Arsenal. But as long as you are effectively drafting your deck to maximize the amount of blue ice that you can Arsenal to play on your opponent's turn, this card obviously just gets so much better.
Can you reread the text phrasing? I just want to verify something.
Yes, give me one moment to pull it back up. If Sigil of Permafrost was fused, the next time you deal arcane damage to a hero this turn,
that's the important
create
bit.
that many frostbite.
So if you are able to have your Waning Moon consume this effect, even if you DR first, then play from Arsenal, hold priority, Waning Moon, the Waning Moon gets the effect. And I think that can be pretty important. Because let's say that can be pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely, because you might play blue frosting.
Sure,
first
just
time
one.
dealing 1, but you might want to hold priority to make the 3 from the Waning Moon get the effect of the Sigil of Permafrost. Yep.
Sweet. Moving on?
Indeed.
Okay, the next thing we got coming up is we're going to get into some equipment. So the next thing up is Spellfire Cloak. This is our wizard equipment chest. It has an instant activated ability on here, and it says destroy Spellfire Cloak, gain 1 resource. Activate this ability only during an opponent's turn. Spellfire Cloak also has Arcane Barrier 1.
This is like my favorite piece of equipment from this set, because there are so many things you can use that 1 resource for outside of just paying for Waning Moon or playing something from Arsenal. Oasis Respite, Sigil of Permafrost. If you get to use this and, for example, pay 1 for a Cold Snap, you effectively just go up a card because it's played from Arsenal, it gives them a Frostbite. And honestly, what I used this for a lot of the time was destroying it to pay for Quell and effectively using it as 1 piece of armor. I didn't think that's what I would be using it for a lot, but it turns out...
2 armor Iron Rot?
It turns out, in this format where there's no armor, that actually ended up being very relevant. For example, when an opponent is completely resourced out and they're threatening just, exact lethal, and putting that 1 piece of armor in front of it and taking control of the game on the last turn mattered more than I ever thought that it would. So and the Arcane Barrier as well, if you ever play an Iyslander Mirror, is going to be very instrumental in you winning that game. Do not destroy it for that 1 resource until you are confident you're ending the game, because you're going to need that Arcane Barrier.
I also like the play pattern with this of cracking it to blue Ice Bolt out of Arsenal into Waning Moon for 4 resources. It's a way to do that off of only 1 pitch.
Right.
Yep. It's very hard to deal that amount of damage on your opponent's turn.
Yeah.
Otherwise, without a significant amount of cards.
Right.
Yeah.
Pick up your Spellfire Cloak early, folks.
Real good.
Okay, we've got a nice little combo piece of equipment here. The other equipment that you're going to want to be looking out for in the seed for Iyslander. So let's go ahead and read these both off. We've got Glacial Horns and Conduit of Frostburn that have a really lovely little interaction. So Glacial Horns reads Ice Equipment Head. Action, destroy Glacial Horns, choose a hero, freeze up to 1 card in their arsenal and 1 ally they control until the start of your next turn. Go again. And before we break that down too much, let's go ahead and read its partner card, Conduit of Frostburn. This is the Ice Wizard Equipment Arms, and it has instant activated ability. Destroy Conduit of Frostburn. The next card you play this turn with an effect that deals arcane damage gains when this deals arcane damage to a hero. Destroy a frozen card in their arsenal. Conduit of Frostburn also has Quell 1.
So
What's the combo?
These cards. So the combo that you want to do is, hopefully your opponent has a card in Arsenal when you're on your turn. So you destroy the Helm to freeze it, and then you're probably going to destroy your Conduit as well to hopefully destroy their Arsenal card and get them to go down in card advantage. I was surprised. I was mentioning earlier. I was really surprised how frequently that did not come up, because when your opponent is aware that you have this combo or can freeze your Arsenal, they're just not going to Arsenal if they're a more proficient player. But sometimes they're forced into situations where they need to Arsenal because you're interrupting their turns with Frostbites or Aether Ice Veins and things like that. So I will say the Conduit of Frostburn is really good standalone because it has Quell, and the rest of the effect doesn't always matter. And the Glacial Horns gets really good on its own as well, just for freezing the arsenal or potentially an ally as well if you're against Dromai and maybe they set up Necria, which is, we discussed, is almost impossible for you to deal with in Iyslander. Maybe it gives you another turn to draw your popper so that you can deal with it the following turn. But collectively together, they make a very extremely powerful combo under the right circumstances.
Yeah, I think that time walk potential of the Helm into Dromai isn't to be understated. Turn off a dragon, get to the next turn, get a new hand, blow them up. The combo, I think maybe you're underselling the piece where they choose not to Arsenal for the entire game, because that's pretty powerful.
Sure. No, and that's actually worth mentioning, because you're going to force them into a play pattern that maybe they wouldn't want to play into otherwise, because Fi's most powerful turns is when he has access to 5
exponentially,
cards.
Yeah.
Correct. No, that's a good point.
I mean, that's built into like everything that Iyslander is supposed to be as the foil in this format, is inherently disrupting the way that your opponents think about how to play sequence their cards.
Now, one other thing to mention, I think, is that you automatically get Helios Miter, and the Helm is pretty actively bad in the mirror. I would almost suggest playing Miter in the mirror as Iyslander, even if you draft the Helm, because they're just going to play their arsenal in response to you cracking the Helm, and Miter is at its best into arcane damage.
Right.
I completely agree.
Play your Miter against Iyslander.
One last sideboard card.
Yeah, and like absolutely essential sideboard card, because I think the thing that we've been learning is that Dromai has so much game into Iyslander with the Aether Ashwings having Arcane Barrier, and so Iyslander, surprisingly enough, as the slow deck, ends up wanting to speed up their game plan significantly to get under those Aether Ashwings, and this next card is an essential tool to achieve that. We're looking at Singe, basically the full cycle of Singe. But let's just start at the blue one. Singe reads 1 resource. It blocks for 3. It's a wizard action. And the text says deal 1 arcane damage to target hero and up to 1 target ally they control. The yellow, deal 1 arcane damage to target hero and up to 2 target allies they control. And the red deals damage to up to 3 target allies they control. So a red Singe is going to ping your opponent for 1 and take down 3 of those Aether Ashwings.
This card is your essential comeback mechanic when you're playing Iyslander against Dromai. We like the yellow and blue, honestly, because I think if you've got to the point where the red becomes relevant, you've probably already lost the game, because they're just so far ahead of you if they've established a board like that. So using blue and yellow to clear, 1 and 2
1 and 2
respective Ashwings is really, really important. The blue is honestly playable even against fire in the mirror. It still pings for 1, and it's a blue that blocks for 3. But this is like borderline essential for playing against Dromai. You can maybe win without it, but if you're ever falling behind, this card it's instrumental and I would say necessary to catch back up.
I don't hate red. I think it's anti-rake, right? When you think about it.
Yeah.
So they play a red rake, you play a red singe, you're back at parity. I mean, it's annoying. It's annoying to have to put such a premium on a sideboard card. The blue is great because the blue advances your game plan. You play it on their turn, you follow with the waning for 3. But, I mean, it's a sideboard card, but you probably need a non-zero amount to have a chance against the Dromais in your pod. So
yeah, Iyslander has some game into Dromai just through skillful play. Drafting of phantasms, destroying their dragons with an arsenal attack when they're attacking. But that, I think, is only stalling out the game. You really need these in order to, like you said, to clear out their stuff so you can get yourself into a position, start getting ahead again, and actually being able to close the game.
Yeah, so the idea that, like, red singe cancels out red rake the embers and brings you to parity, like, I think there might be like a minor fallacy there in the fact that like Dromai's game plan is so effective at just generating like these little bits of incremental value over time, and like you were saying, Rylie, taking out 3 of those Aether Ashwings, you might be in a position where you're already just too far behind from the amount of advantage that they're pressing, because like if every element of their game plan allows them to create multiple additional Aether Ashwings throughout the course of the game, and your one card is negating their one card, but you only have access to, say, that one card, whereas their game plan has access to multiple ways to continue creating ash, multiple ways to continue creating these Ashwings. So it's like, I think I still prefer the flexibility over the red one, because the red one could just like...
So what you're basically saying is Singe is Iyslander's only way of dealing with the Ashwings, but Rake the Embers is not Dromai's only way to advance their board state. So
I guess
that makes sense.
2 things I'll highlight there is that you're slightly ahead, I think, by singeing out a Rake, because you're now in a position where you're hopefully floating 2 resources and turn on your Waning Moon. So you're advancing your own game state. Plus you did 1 damage to their face with the Singe. And also, yeah, red Singe pitches worse than yellow and blue Singe, but it also does their exact same job. You can Singe 1 or 2. You can red Singe 1 or 2 Aether Ashwings if you want to. No one's stopping you.
Sure.
So it still accomplishes the same job while just pitching slightly worse.
Mm-hmm. I think it probably becomes so essential to the matchup that you probably just have to take 2 or 3 Singes to even have a chance.
You're not going to be spoiled for choice either.
Right.
I think you take the Singes you see.
Yeah, you can't be too picky, right?
I mean, I've seen sealed pools with 0 Singes. So.
Sure.
How do you win?
Hope you don't play Dromai.
Well, I didn't. During pre-release, I
played
played 4 5s.
That
might end up being
sealed.
A pretty fair hope in sealed.
Yeah, I don't think you'll have the same benefit in draft, unfortunately.
No, not at all. So that's going to go ahead and conclude all of the like very standout cards for our elemental Ice Wizard. So again, I mean, we can't harp on this enough. There are so many relevant cards that are going to make up the meat of your deck, but these are the cards in each class that are going to have the greatest influence on your pick orders, identifying what seat you're in, whether your hero is open, your hero of choice is open, what hero you should be playing, and it's going to really dictate your play patterns and the cards that you should be thinking about playing around and hoping to build with. But beyond that, we are going to get into an honorable mention section because, we've only covered commons and rares, but there are a handful of Majestics that, in our opinion, will just like outright win you the game, and you should pick them extremely highly. Not all Majestics are created equal. Just because you pull an M in your pack one pick one does not mean that you should be playing it or you should be drafting it highly. But this short list are the ones that are going to be such a huge swing in the game that you need to highly prioritize them. You probably don't need us to tell you twice to pick them, but we're going to do our due diligence and share those game-winning Majestics with you. So the first one on our list is Erase Face. It is 2 cost red, and it has base attack 6, and it blocks for 2. And the text says, when Erase Face hits a hero, card and tokens they own lose all class and talent types until the end of their next turn. And I should note, this is a generic action that any of our heroes can play.
So, maybe most notably, it's another 6 that destroys Phantasm.
Yep.
So very relevant for killing off dragons. But if you actually get the opportunity to play this, especially against Fi, I think is where it's the most relevant. But even Iyslander to an extent, it just turns off Draconic Chains. It makes Iyslander unable to reveal for fusing. This is extremely powerful card. If you get the opportunity to see this, you absolutely take it.
This is a sideboard card that's secretly in every matchup because it pops versus Dromai. It turns off all of the Draconic Chainlink stuff for Fi, and it turns off Fusion for Iyslander, in addition to a bunch of other smaller benefits that we go into.
And as we go through all these cards, I mean, we don't have to harp on them too much because they are obviously on their face just very powerful. So let's move on to the next one. That All You Got is a 0 cost generic defense reaction that will block for 3. And it reads, while this is defending an attack with 2 or less power, when the combat chain closes, draw a card, and also it pitches for 2 at yellow.
A defense reaction in a format that has almost none, and it replaces itself.
Say no more.
It's incredible.
It's very, very, very strong.
Also, in a format where 1 and 2 power attacks are extremely relevant.
Extremely relevant.
Extremely relevant.
And it doesn't have to be an attack action. It's just an attack.
Right.
Yeah.
So at worst case scenario, you throw this in front of an Aether Ashwing, you're still getting the benefit of preventing a damage and
Drawing a card.
staying at card neutral.
Well, on to the next one. This one's an ice action, and we're looking at a new card type here. It's an Affliction Aura. Okay, so it's a blue pitch. It's called Hypothermia, and it costs 0. Now, an Affliction enters the arena under an opposing hero's control, so the effect that we're going to read on the card affects your opponent. So it reads, attacks you control can't gain go again. At the beginning of your end phase, destroy Hypothermia.
So just at a baseline, this is an ice blue. So
A 0 cost ice.
yeah,
We
so
love
we
ice blues.
already wanted an Iyslander, and this card basically has the subtext of saying turn off your opponent's turn. There is a shocking amount of stuff in this set that gains go again that you don't initially become aware of. There's a lot of Fi cards that say gain go again prior to
Including
them
his
resolving,
weapon.
including the Ember Blade. And then as far as Dromai is concerned, all of her dragon allies gain go again because of the ability of
Right.
playing that red card. So if you're able to effectively time Hypothermia before they've resolved whatever attack's going to gain go again, it no longer can. So the one thing that I do want to mention about the card is if the card already has go again, this doesn't stop it from having go again. It has to gain the go again. So if it naturally has go again, it doesn't shut it off. But it also gives it no frostbite when you play it out of Arsenal. I mean, this card just does everything. It's extremely powerful.
So a little bit of rules stuff here, just to make sure people are aware, because I've seen this gotten wrong time and time again in the Discords. First of all, if something has gained go again, and then you play Hypothermia, it no longer has go again because of substaging. It doesn't matter which order the things happened in. And second of all, anything that doesn't just have the words go again printed on it, with nothing else, natural bold text go again, loses go again under Hypothermia. Doesn't matter if it says has, gains, found go again. These things are all synonyms under the comprehensive rules.
Cool. Moving on.
Real good card.
Yeah, play Hypothermia, obviously. Next one's Phoenix Form. It's red, Draconic Ninja attack. It's 0 cost, base 3, blocks for 3. If you control 1 or more Phoenix Flames, Phoenix Form has go again. If you control 2 or more, it has +2 attack. If you control 3 or more Phoenix Flames, it has, when this hits a hero, draw 3 cards.
The ceiling for this card is just through the roof. You're almost always going to play it with at least 1 Phoenix Flame, and at that point it's just a 0 for 3 with go again. If you can get it with 2, it's a 0 for 5, which we said earlier is absurd.
Correct.
And if you manage to assemble Exodia and get the 3 Phoenix Flames and draw 3 cards, you've won the game on the spot.
Yeah.
I think at that point. Additionally, it blocks for 3. I don't know. Is there too much more to say about the card? It's just absurd.
I wouldn't be surprised if you play out the whole format without ever casting this under 3 Phoenixes, but it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
The floor is high enough that the card is good no matter what.
This card is really reminiscent of Swarming Gloomveil.
Yeah.
Which we learned through Everfest was also extremely powerful. So seeing a Draconic Swarming Gloomveil, yeah, that card's going to be nuts.
Next card is a Draconic action attack. It is Thaw. It pitches for 1 at red, and it costs 2 resources. Base attack is 6. It defends for 2, and it reads, while Thaw is in your graveyard, at the start of your turn, you may banish it and choose one of the following. Destroy target Frostbite, destroy target Ice Affliction, or unfreeze target frozen card.
So this is the last popper of the format,
popper.
and if you've noticed, we've mentioned I think every single one on this list.
Yep.
That's how important we think they are for beating Dromai. But this has an even more powerful additional effect if you end up playing against Iyslander. We mentioned before just how much 1 Frostbite can screw up your turn when you've been sequencing out your turn in your head. Like, this is the most optimal way to do it. 1 Frostbite can really throw you off. This gets you back to your ideal turn. If you ever end up with an Ice Affliction like Hypothermia, this is just going to negate it. So if you ever end up with 2 really high power level draft decks, it puts you back at parity.
I have a question that I actually don't know the answer to.
Let's hear it.
What's the timing on banishing Thaw?
It says it just has to be in your graveyard, and at the start of your turn, you banish it.
Start of your turn.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Where my head was at was mitigating the Iyslander equipment combo. But I guess that's not going to happen.
Yeah, and if they happen to give you the Frostbite at instant speed from playing it from Arsenal, you're gonna obviously that's not gonna happen.
Right.
But if they hit you with any amount of Frostbite coming from their turn, you're able to just get rid of that. And
Something else to be concerned with, like obviously, if you draft this, or you see this, you play it into Dromai for the popping, and you likely don't play it into Fi.
sure.
You probably play it in Iyslander, but the secondary effect might not be as effective as you might think in Limited because of the absence of afflictions, and because you need to find a way to get it into your graveyard in order to use it. And 5, for example, isn't really in the business of sending 2 for 6s without go again, but
Putting it in the graveyard is actually a pretty notable point.
Yeah.
Because
you can't block.
yeah, Icelander's not going to give you a lot of opportunities to actually block
block with
anything.
it. Exactly.
So you might actually struggle quite a bit to end up with this in the graveyard. So maybe it's actually just really more relevant against Dromai.
I think.
But it has a niche benefit of potentially being good against Iyslander as well. Yeah.
Moving on, we've got Tome of Firebrand. Tome of Firebrand is a Draconic instant. It's red, pitches for 1, costs 1. And it reads, play Tome of Firebrand only if you control 4 or more Draconic chain links. Draw 2 cards.
If you resolve this card, you're going to win the game.
Right.
It rewards you for doing the thing that you are trying to do in all cases.
The card's actually pretty bad when it's bad, but when it's good, you win the game.
Yep.
So you play it anyway.
Yep, play it for the high roll potential. I really think if you play this, you just won the game on the spot. Yeah.
I like when that happens. Okay, last card in our honorable mentions list, the Majestics that you should play. Red Freezing Point. It is an elemental wizard action, costs 3 resources, and has Ice Fusion. Deal 5 arcane damage to target hero. If Freezing Point was fused, instead deal X arcane damage, where X is 5, plus the number of frostbites, ice afflictions, and frozen cards they control. It blocks for 3.
I think this is the ceiling for the amount of arcane damage you can realistically do in this format.
In one source.
Correct.
Yeah.
Just you want to destroy your helm, assuming you got one, maybe against Dromai. You freeze their arsenal, you freeze an ally, and then you send the freezing point in for 7 arcane, followed up with the waning moon for 9. I really think that's the ceiling for realistically doing any amount of arcane damage in one turn. If you resolve all that, you probably win the game.
Yeah. You probably crack your gloves too if you have them.
This is also still just really good, even if you don't fuse it, right? Because
Yeah,
still
3 for 5. The
arcane.
floor of 3 for 5 is fine.
Yep. You do need a minimum number of those types of cards when you're playing Iyslander to be able to close out the game. Yeah.
Unfortunately, in Limited, there's not really any ways to stack up frostbites in front of this.
No, because almost all of them don't say go again. with the exception of Eisenhower Weathervane. So, I mean, sure, if you Eisenhower Weathervane into this for...
It's actually really good, isn't it?
Whatever that is, 10 arcane damage or
So
something
the only
crazy.
time you're playing this unmentionable, like, red ice card is if you have this Majestic that you probably
That is a truly fantasy play, though. I don't think you're realistically doing that.
Well, friends, I think that brings us to the end of our limited set review for Uprising Draft. We've tackled all of our class-specific standout cards. Obviously, so many more cards to experiment with, play with, get your reps in, learn what you can about the format, and I think we all have the sense that there is some depth here that's to be explored and that the format will continue to evolve and change as people learn to evaluate these cards, learn how and when to play them, how to build their decks, and are also effectively making sure that they're picking the necessary sideboard cards to shore up their tougher matchups, understanding what matchups are difficult, and what matchups they're more favored in, and how to shore those things up. That's going to just be shifting and changing, and hopefully we'll all be able to get back together soon and talk about that as we learn more about the format. Do you guys have any final thoughts about your experience playing with these heroes? Maybe you want to go through some quick talking points on what to expect playing Dromai, Fi, and Iyslander, or how to play against these heroes, play with them, play against them. Any other parting thoughts there?
I think I want to say that I really enjoyed the way that this set plays out in draft. It's similar in a way to Tales of Aria with having 3 heroes, so you're likely to have a pool that's 3-3-2 for the most part as a hero distribution. But I think this actually set Uprising rewards you more for fixing or picking decks for specific matchups more so than Tales of Aria did, because you're going to be rewarded a lot more if you get those cinches against Dromai, for example, or the Oasis Respites against Iyslander. I don't think you necessarily really had that much agency in Tales of Aria because you were more concerned about just drafting playable cards to contest Oldhim and trying to deck you out.
I think the push and pull of both there being less overlap than there was in Tales and there being more extremely viable sideboard cards makes every pick relevant. And I think you're going to feel the pain a lot more if you draft 8 unplayables than you might have in Tales. Now, the one mitigating factor there is what we talked about briefly earlier, Phoenix Flame potentially taking up 3 deck slots. But outside of Fi, I mean, in Dromai, that's not great, and in Iyslander, it's impossible. So,
Right, absolutely. I really enjoyed drafting the set. When we got to do it, I want to draft it some more. I want to learn some more about the nuances. My initial takeaways are that if you are a seasoned or practiced drafter who is able to read signals and identify your seat very early, it's going to increase your chance of fixing your deck and acquiring those sideboard cards maybe earlier than you would, because if you wait a little bit too long, someone else may have already taken them because they just needed the necessary number of playables and you lost your opportunity to shore up your harder matches. So maybe take an early risk and wheeling something around, seeing what happens, seeing if it gets back to you. I think you're going to be really rewarded for being to make those more higher level, more advanced drafting skill plays.
and by comparison, I think trying to force things is going to destroy your chances. I mean, you can draft an unplayable deck in this set.
For sure.
Yeah, more than any
sure.
other set.
For sure.
Yeah, you can. I did. It's hard.
Oh, Berto.
So, I mean, it's true, though. As a, relatively novice drafter in Flesh and Blood, there was so much less forgiveness in, specking on my picks and trying to stay open and, not being able to really identify what seat I was in. And, it's even harder when you're sitting down with 8 people who are drafting the set for the first time, because, really being able to, reliably read your seat becomes even harder in that case. So, I think if you really enjoy drafting, the actual experience of drafting, not necessarily draft gameplay. Obviously, I love draft gameplay, and Limited is my favorite way to play all trading card games. But if you like the experience of drafting, the depth that comes with the decisions you have to make, the way that you receive and send signals based on the picks that you're making, when you're staying open, when you're really locking in the seat that you're in, that is where we're going to get the most fun out of the set, I think. I think we're going to get a lot of joy in navigating that part of this game, and the people who figure out that piece of the puzzle first are going to be more heavily rewarded than I think the people who are like better at playing the game. Like, obviously, being a skill-intensive game, you should if you're better at playing the game, you'll probably win. But if you aren't paying enough attention to the actual draft experience, this set will punish you for that. And so, you know, take your time with the list of standout cards that Ciro and Rylie have put together here. I'm going to be studying it. I'm going to be really like putting my own critical thinking into the analysis of these cards and really trying to get a sense when I start playing with them, because I think this is a really great starting point. I really appreciate the work that you guys have put into this, because it's going to really like inform my draft experience. And I will say, like, the fact of the matter is it's not easy to access Flesh and Blood drafts. We do have a draft, Road to Nat season coming up, but there are not that many draft Road to Nats within driving distance of us, and we're in like a populous area in central Pennsylvania. So, you know, there aren't that many local armories that draft. We're trying to have draft events here, but, you know, Flesh and Blood is still a growing game that doesn't necessarily have like a rusted on limited community that's going to show up to draft every single week, because everyone's playing their favorite, you know, constructed formats as they get into the game. So when you have less opportunity to draft, when you have less time for reps and for practice, doing this kind of thinking, evaluating the cards in the ways that they have, the hours that they've spent thinking about this and talking about this, is going to go really far, and it's going to be really useful for everyone who's taken the time, I hope, to watch this video. And, you know, I think what we'll do in the description is maybe we'll share that list, so that people can kind of evaluate it and take the time on their own to look at these cards, think about them, read them through, figure out their use cases, so that when you're sitting down at your first, second, third draft, you're not being punished by the difficulty that is finding your seat and navigating the draft format.
James White said when we were in New Jersey prior to the Pro Tour that he felt like this was the best draft set that they had developed so far. I'm still a little hesitant to figure out if that's true or not based off of my limited experience so far, but I gotta say it felt extremely skill intensive in a way that drafting has never felt before.
Sure, yeah.
I was really surprised about how important I felt like it was to have knowledge about the cards going into it and the draft archetypes. Another piece of advice I'd say is if you, as the viewer, think that you are a skilled or above average player, don't just default to Fi.
No.
Honestly, I think that you will find that you are going to have a lot of success playing Iyslander and Dromai. Fi might be the easiest to put together, but in draft, I don't think that it's necessarily the best deck. I think that the power level is very evenly distributed across all three heroes in draft.
And of course, the hero distribution in your pod is going to influence that too. I just think that Tales of Aria had a lot of replaceability in cards, which is a concept that comes up a lot when you're talking about consistency of decks and also consistency in draft, right? Like, Oldham didn't want X, Y, and Z card. I need a critical mass of Earth blues. And then even if you had to pivot into Briar, you had a bunch of cards you could still play. Basically, it was like, it felt like Tales of Aria was drafting with training wheels, and Uprising took the wheels off, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it stands to reason that someone like James White would say that this is the best limited format they've ever created, because, you know, in my experience as like a Magic drafter, the limited formats that I was in love with the most were the ones that were super skill testing, that like made you feel smart when you cracked the format, or that when you were ahead of the format and were able to metagame within the evolutions of that draft format. So like, the ones that make you feel smart and the ones that are really hard are the ones that really experienced, really high caliber players enjoy the most, because it's where they get their edge in their experience. And so I'm not surprised that James White really loves this limited format, because I definitely feel like I'm going to be a bit behind, and I'm going to be leaning on you guys as much as possible to make this draft format palatable for little old me.
There's also a funny meta concept, I think, in draft where you'll find an edge, you'll feel like you're ahead, and then everyone will learn what you found out, and then that just became the worst thing to be doing, because now everyone's doing it.
Hopefully we see a lot of shifts and changes like that.
I would say knowing the preferences and the tendencies of the people that you're drafting with is actually going to be really important for this draft, maybe more than it's ever been. Because if somebody leans more towards one hero or another, you can opt maybe to pick the more niche hero earlier and start really refining an even more powerful deck because the 6 other people are going for the Draconic heroes.
See, this is the real metagaming, is coming up with a list of trash cards and getting you to play them so that when we sit in a draft pod with you, we increase our chances.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty confident that we picked what I believe are the most efficient and most characteristic cards that you're really going to be looking for when you're looking through draft for identifying your seat, for picking your hero, and having the most success when building your deck.
Yeah, and I do, again, I will echo once more that I really appreciate the work that you guys put into this. My experience this weekend has become so much clearer as a result of processing this with you and reading all of these cards and hearing your analysis, because there was a lot of experiences that I had that made me feel really challenged, and I didn't have the tools or the understanding of the set and the format yet to understand why. I was having such a difficult time going through this analysis, reading this list of cards, and really better, deepening my understanding made it very clear what mistakes I was making, because I was making mistakes and I was misevaluating things, and now I can understand that enough to actively change my behavior, my choices, and my strategy when it comes to my next draft.
Yeah, when I was playing Sealed all weekend, I was using this as my baseline. Ciro and I spent about 6 to 7 hours reviewing every single card individually in this set, in preparation for playing limited, and then that's what I used as my guide when I was playing all 3 pre-releases this weekend, and was able to utilize that to pretty good success. So like I said, I do feel pretty confident that.
You're wrong a couple times, but
we definitely bumped a couple cards up here later that ended up performing a lot better than expected. Red Healing Balm, for example. But I'm pretty confident that we have given a good baseline, or maybe a curriculum to review as far as drafting Uprising, so that you guys can share in the same amount of success with your own drafts.
Gentlemen, great work. Thank you so much for being with us. This is the first production of its kind for our Owl Central Games, and we're hoping to do more stuff like this. And I do want to take a moment to thank Dan Zaleski. He's the guy behind the cameras and the microphones and the lights, making all of this happen. And we really, really appreciate.
Round of applause for Dan. He was here the whole time with us.
The time, effort, patience that he's put into this work. He does all of our graphic design, all of our video and photo content for all of our socials and our website. We're really proud of the work that he does, and we're really grateful for him making this possible by putting in the extra time and getting things set up for us. So we're hoping to do more stuff like this, so leave some feedback in the comments and encourage us to keep doing this work, because we love the game. We want to bring the game to more people, and yeah, I don't know what else to say other than to express my gratitude for the Flesh and Blood community, all the people that I've met in it, and I want to continue to do my best to steward the game alongside these wonderful gentlemen and the amazing people from our local community too, that have helped bolster this up, really encourage us in the work that we're doing and the thought that we put into the game, the passion that we all have for it, and turning our little armory community of 2 people 9 months ago to 10, 12, 15 people a week, and over 20 people for a pre-release and pro quests and blah blah blah. It's been really wonderful. We love the game, and we hope to continue bringing you more of this type of content. What we're going to do is a little special treat for ourselves after we wrap up here, is we're going to crack a couple of packs, but I think that's going to come in a separate video here. So for now, we're going to say ta-ta. Thank you for being with us, and subscribe, share, retweet. All of our handles will be in the descriptions. But we'll see you next time.